Welcome to the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. My name is Christina Eaton. I am the Supplier Diversity Manager here, and thank you for coming to the inaugural Financial Summit. We are very excited to have you here because supplier diversity is ingrained in the mission of the bank, and that is why this event is so important. I would like to thank our partner, the Greater New England Minority Supplier Diversity Council, for partnering with us and helping us to put on this event today. We hope you guys have an enriching time with all the networking and education, and we look forward to a great day together. To welcome you to the bank, I'm going to introduce our VP, Danny Best, who's going to come and welcome you all.
Thank you, Christina. And good morning. It is so wonderful to see you all here, both in person and online. We're extremely proud to host this inaugural Financial Summit, a partnership with the Boston Fed's Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and the New England Greater New England Minority Supplier Diversity Council. I was just, joking with Peter. It's like you got a long name there, but it's such a pleasure to have that partnership. Our goal is to host this event, providing education and support for supplier diversity programs and outreach on an annual basis. In most circles, the bank's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion in its talent management practices, like acquiring, developing, promoting, and rewarding talent, is well understood. Our aspiration is to have a workforce that reflects the region that we serve, and to do that at all levels. We believe that diversity brings with it a mix of thought, a mix of ideas, and innovation, and better equips us to achieve our mission. What may be less well known is our commitment to supplier diversity. Here at the Boston Fed, our supplier diversity program is a proactive business strategy that seeks to provide minority and women-owned businesses with equal access to sourcing and purchasing opportunities. Last year, our spend with diverse suppliers was almost $13 million. And our diverse spend was, scattered throughout a variety of different categories. The top 5 being staffing services, general construction, computer equipment and maintenance, food services, and technology services. And it's probably no surprise that the area with the largest spend happened to be the area that my boss leads, Steve Wright, in that category of services. The Boston Fed aims to foster diversity in procurement, in the procurement process by removing barriers, encouraging participation of women and minority businesses, increasing access to opportunities, and facilitating connections for purchase decision makers and minority vendors. It's great that we have partners like the Greater New England Minority Supplier Diversity Council in partnership with these efforts to equip small business entrepreneurs with important tools and information they need to grow and to thrive. Thank you. I look forward to spending the day with you. Thank you for being here. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce the Boston Fed President and CEO, Susan Collins. And Susan, she's probably thinking, Danny has had the opportunity to introduce me like 4 or 5 times, so we're going to get a new person to do that, Susan. But it's because we hold a fair amount of diversity, equity, inclusion forums, and Susan is always here and always supporting. So I get that distinct pleasure pretty often. We've been thrilled to have Susan's strong support for diversity, equity, inclusion programs and initiatives since she joined last July. Susan's most recently spent a decade at the Ford School of Public Policy at the University of Michigan, eventually as provost. But she's no stranger to New England, having received her degrees here and then going on to serve as professor, researcher, policy advisor here in Boston and Washington. She also served 9 years on the Chicago's Fed Board of Directors. So she's quite familiar with the Federal Reserve System and its broad responsibilities. We are fortunate to have her here supporting our mission for a vibrant, resilient, and inclusive economy. Please join me in welcoming President Susan Collins.
So, of course, I have to start out by saying it's always a great pleasure to have Danny welcome me. And all of the events that we do, I'll say together, are critical and really important. So let me start by just saying good morning to everybody who's here in the room, all who are joining us virtually as well. We're really delighted that you are participating in what is an inaugural financial summit. An inaugural means that we hope to expect to continue this work together. As was already mentioned, it is an event that is jointly hosted by our own Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and in partnership with the Greater New England Minority Supplier Development Council. And we're delighted to have this partnership and to work on this together. In fact, partnerships are really core to the way that we do a wide range of the work that we do. So we hope that all of you find the activities and the engagement with one another useful, informative, as you navigate and find additional ways to grow your own small businesses. I'd actually like to start by saying just a few things about the crucial role that small business plays in our economy. First, small businesses employ roughly 60 million people, or nearly half of our country's private sector workforce. They also create 2/3 of new jobs. Small firms are really an economic lifeline in many different dimensions for communities across our country. Small businesses, and you all know this, help drive innovation and help create economic opportunity. And small business ownership offers really promising pathways that allow people to create their own jobs and also to provide job opportunities for others, often within minority community neighborhoods. They're also an asset that can be passed on to future generations, and this makes small businesses a critical source of employment and also of wealth, building wealth, and that is particularly important in minority communities as well. Research has found that minority-owned small business can significantly reduce the wealth gap, the racial wealth gap, while simultaneously reducing the unemployment rate for people of color, which again we know often is above the unemployment rate for whites. And I have to say that watching unemployment closely, as I do, in terms of monetary policy, seeing unemployment rates come down, in particular for people of color, has been a really promising development and something that we're interested in watching to see ways that we can keep that going forward. So minority-owned businesses have grown really rapidly in recent years to roughly 8 million, and that means that well-being and the ability to access financing is increasingly important in order to foster economic growth and also access to opportunity, as I've been talking about. So it's great to know that minority-owned firms are growing in our country, but we also see some trends that are cause for concern, and I think it's important to recognize those and to find ways to address them. The Federal Reserve in 2022 had a small business credit survey report on firms that were owned by people of color, and it highlights key trends and key data takeaways across Asian, Black, Hispanic, and white-owned businesses. It finds that businesses that are owned by people of color often face more financial and operational challenges than their white-owned counterparts. So I just want to highlight a few of the findings from that report. firms that are owned by people of color disproportionately reported difficulties covering business expenses, such as wages, rents, inventory costs, debt payments. And in particular, minority-owned firms reported lower approval rates for loans and for lines of credit than their white-owned counterparts. And firms owned by people of color were about twice as likely as white-owned firms to describe their financial condition as poor. So these are clearly issues that we need to understand and we need to work to address. Here at the Federal Reserve, our mission is to create a vibrant, inclusive economy that works for all, not an economy that just works for some people. And we advance that mission through a broad portfolio of work that includes economic research, community and economic development, supervision. All of these and other activities that we engage in are intended to support a strong economy that is characterized by equitable opportunities. We also play a unique role in convening groups and creating networks to figure out how to tackle tough economic challenges and making sure that we understand the wide range of dimensions. And of course, activities and events like this are very much a part of that type of work, and we do that, as I mentioned before, typically or often in partnership. So within our own walls here at the Boston Fed, we are working hard to support local and diverse small business. And as part of that commitment, as Danny has already mentioned, the bank seeks to provide small and minority and women-owned businesses equal access to sourcing and purchasing opportunities. And he's already mentioned some of the numbers. That accounts for about 14% of our overall spend in 2022. So I'll conclude my remarks by just reiterating the hope that by joining us and spending some time with us and together today, that each of you will gain a better understanding of some of the challenges you face, but importantly, the opportunities as well, and expanding those, and maybe developing some additional connections. I've already seen people making connections, both ones that they had not kind of seen recently, and then some new connections, and that's wonderful. Ultimately, we hope that this event can help your business to grow, to be sustainable, and to thrive. So I'm delighted to be here with you this morning, delighted to see all of you again in the room, and for those joining virtually. And thank you so much for being here.
It is my pleasure to introduce Peter Hurst to come up and welcome you all on behalf of the GNE MSTC.
So thank you, Christina. And those two words, thank you, I think are two of the most important words in the English language. So let me start by thanking all of you for attending here in person, those who are attending virtually. I want to thank the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, President Collins. We appreciate you letting us in your house. Your Steve Wright, my good friend, Danny Bess, and your team, Christina, Ramona, and all of the folks who helped plan this. Thank you, and I want to thank you in advance because this is really important. As President Collins indicated, there is a racial wealth gap in this country. The median net worth of a black family and a Hispanic family, respectively, are substantially less than the median net worth of a white family. And our thesis is that minority business development is a very effective lever to reduce the racial wealth gap that exists, not only in this country, but also in this region, the state, the city. Minority businesses do four things that make communities stronger. They generate economic output, they create and maintain jobs, especially with people of color, they generate tax revenue, and the owners of these businesses, a number of whom are here today and a number of whom are participating virtually, are servant leaders in the communities in which their businesses operate. All of that makes this nation stronger, this region stronger, and this community stronger. And that sounds good, but let me just set the table. In this country, there are 1 million minority-owned businesses with paid employees. Those minority-owned businesses have $1.4 trillion in aggregate revenue. They have 9.4 million employees. The Greater New England Minority Supplier Development Council is part of a national network that includes 2,000 corporate members, 23 regional councils, the National Minority Supplier Development Council, and 15,000 businesses that have been certified as being minority-owned and controlled. Those 15,000 businesses generated $261 billion in revenue. They had over 800,000 employees, and 70% of those employees were people of color. So that really sets the table. And closer to home, here in New England, the Greater New England Minority Supplier Development Council has certified about 270 minority-owned businesses that have $2.9 billion in aggregate revenue. They have 25,000 employees, and about 65% of those are people of color. So nationally, throughout the G&E and NMSCC network and here in New England, our minority-owned business community is doing what we said it would do. They're generating economic output, they're creating and maintaining jobs, they're generating tax revenue, and they're leading in the community. So minority-owned businesses, like any other business, needs three things. That's why we're here today. They need contracts, they need financial capital, debt and equity, and they need intellectual capital. So this summit today is critically important because it's not just about contracts, it's also about providing them with the tools that they need to get access to capital. So all of our panelists today are not going to give you commercials about, what products they offer. They're going to actually tell you how the lenders who are here are going to tell you how they make credit decisions. The institutional investors who are here are going to tell you how they make investment decisions. And we're going to have folks talk about how you can grow your business inorganically through mergers and acquisitions. Because the goal is, while we have 1 million minority-owned businesses in this country with paid employees, we need 10 million. The racial wealth gap is hurting the U.S. economy, it's hurting the regional economy, and it's hurting the Commonwealth's economy. So we can talk about it, or we can do something about it, and it's easy to do. All we got to do is find contracts, we got to find financial capital, and we got to find intellectual capital. So as I said, my mother taught me the two most important words in the English language are thank you. Thank you to the Federal Reserve Bank for having us. Thank you, President Collins, for your hospitality and your partnership. And thank all of you for participating in this conversation, because we're going to leave here not with more conversation, but with a plan of action that we can execute. So have a great day, and thanks again.
Probably going to hear thank you a lot today. But thank you, Danny, President Collins, and President Hurst. So we'll start with our program. Very excited to introduce to you all Mike Evangelist with the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston to talk about wealth inequality.
Thank you, Christina. Again, my name is Mike Evangelist. I'm a senior policy analyst here at the Boston Fed in our Community Development Department. And today I'm going to talk about wealth inequality and racial wealth inequality specifically. And I'm going to start by giving you kind of a 1,000-foot overview of what inequality looks like in the United States. And then I'm going to talk about a project that we have underway that we're really excited about. It's going to be a survey of wealth inequality in Massachusetts. So I'll explain a little bit more in depth what that's about. But before I begin, I should say that the views represented here are my own and do not necessarily reflect those of the Boston Fed, the Federal Reserve System, or its Board of Governors. And with that out of the way, I want to start by talking about a study that was done about 10 years ago down the street at Harvard Business School. And these professors there, they're really interested in understanding how people in the United States think about wealth inequality. And so they asked people, a nationally representative sample, if you were to range people from the least wealthy to the most wealthy, the top 20%, how much of the nation's wealth should they hold? And if we had a perfectly equal society, that top 20%, well, they would hold 20% of the nation's wealth. So I want you all, I'm not going to call on anyone, but just think to yourselves, if you could distribute wealth in society, how much would that top 20% have? And what they found is the average person, they said ideally the top 20% would have 32% of the country's wealth. So that's actually pretty close to an equal society. And this is what people thought was the ideal. And then they asked these same people, what do you think the actual distribution looks like? How much do the top 20% really hold? And again, just think to yourselves what this might be. Take a guess. 90? Okay. Well, on average, people said 59%. And so this is, quite, people believe the country to be pretty fairly unequal. And so someone said 90. So the actual, this is, again, a little over 10 years ago, the top 20% hold about 84% of the nation's wealth. So, very, very, very close. So I think, what this is showing us is that wealth inequality in the United States, it's worse than people think it is, and it's actually much worse than they want it to be. So I think that's kind of the main takeaway. In the next couple of slides, I'll try to put these figures in some more context. So this is actually looking at total household wealth in the United States. And I should say, we're at the Boston Fed, so you weren't going to get away without seeing some figures and some data. So this is looking at total household wealth from 1989 to 2019. And these figures are adjusted for inflation. So back in 1989, households held roughly $35 trillion in cumulative wealth. And this figure, you can see it's grown enormously over the past 30 years. There was a slight dip around the Great Recession, following 2007, but that recovered, and now we're almost at $100 trillion. So that's enormous growth in wealth. But this growth has not been distributed equally. And so here I've divided the country up into three different sections. First, again, ranging people from least wealthy to most wealthy. If you take the bottom half, in 2019, they only held about 1% of the nation's wealth. That floors me when I see that. That was totally a surprise and kind of a shock to me. I never would have thought it would have been that low. And then we have the next 45%. So these are people just on the other side of that distribution, the middle point. They hold about 34% of the nation's wealth. And then the top 5, they hold 65% of total wealth. And this, you can see that all the wealth increase over the past 30 years is mostly gone to this top 5%. Where the other parts of the distribution, they've all kind of realized a lessening share of total wealth. And so, this story is really about kind of the top part of the distribution and that kind of pulling away from everyone else. But we know that wealth inequality, there are other parts to that. And, as has already been mentioned, racial wealth inequality is a huge deal. And we have inequality in many other different contexts. So in employment, health outcomes, income, education, all these different spheres. But I think one of the most severe areas we see inequality is in the context of wealth. And my hypothesis is that wealth is a cumulative thing. It's just something we accumulate over generations. It's passed down. It depends on education. It depends on employment, income, your health, all these different things. And so I think we're seeing all this inequality in other spheres kind of compounded in this area of wealth. And it's already been mentioned that this difference in median wealth, and these are the actual figures. As data is taken from the Federal Reserve Board's Survey of Consumer Finances. Again, these figures are adjusted for inflation. So we can see back in 1989, the median black family, this is the family kind of in the middle of the wealth distribution, held just under $8,000 in wealth. And this is hardly enough to afford a college education, to buy a home, even to buy a car. So not very much wealth. And there was a pretty rapid increase through 2001. Black wealth peaked at about $28,000 for the median family. But then since then, it's kind of stagnated and actually declined a little bit. And so not a lot of progress there. If we look at white wealth, again, it really took off through the Great Recession up until about 2007. There was a decline with the loss of home values and equities. But then that recovered pretty quickly in 2019. And over this time period, because of stagnating black wealth and kind of the growth in white wealth, you've actually seen the absolute gap grow over this time from about 134,000 30 years ago to about 164,000 today. So not a great story of progress. And then I'm sure everyone's wondering about Hispanics. I didn't show them on the figure because they map pretty closely onto black wealth. And so the Hispanic white gap, looks pretty similar. So also, fairly low levels of wealth for the median household. And I think, it's already been mentioned, the importance of wealth to the economy. On our team, we kind of focus a lot on individuals. And we talk about really two different areas. One is just having money to fall back on in the case of an emergency. So if you have an unexpected car repair, a health bill, something like that, being able to rely on wealth to cover these things that you can't necessarily cover out of your income. And the Federal Reserve Board, they have a survey they do every couple of years, and they ask this question, do you have enough cash on hand to cover a $400 emergency expense? And about a third of the country said that they don't. And I don't know about you, but $400 does not buy you a lot today. That's a pretty minor emergency, I think, in today's context. So, if you're looking at a health bill or a legal bill, it's going to be well more, a great deal more than $400. So, not a lot of families have the resources on hand to cover these kinds of expenses. And then the other area we focus on is investment. And this is kind of looking with an eye toward the future. And so wealth can help you attain a college education, which I've already mentioned has implications for your future capacity to generate wealth and income. It can also help you attain appreciable assets like homes. So a home is not only it grows in value, but you can also choose what neighborhood you live in, the schools you send your children to. So wealth is critical in this context. And then I think this audience can appreciate this. Wealth can also help you take risks and start a business. So I think many of you, when you were starting out, probably had to draw on capital from somewhere. Maybe there were times when it would have helped to have wealth to rely on that. Maybe you weren't able to take a risk, or maybe you could take a risk that you wanted to. You can see how wealth, really increases your capacity to, take risks and invest in a business. And then that business itself, in turn, can be a source of future wealth. And then finally, people have wealth so they can retire and stop working eventually, and also critically to transfer wealth to future generations. And so this can allow people to buy their first home or start a business, to get an education. And so wealth has intergenerational component to it. And so, I've argued here that, wealth inequality, we have a problem that the top is pulling away, but we also have, and also a problem with racial wealth inequality and parts of our society being left out and excluded from the wealth building process. And I'm going to transition a little bit to tell you about this survey that we're doing. So we're partnering with some local organizations, the Eastern Bank Foundation, the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce, the Boston Foundation, and the Barr Foundation on a study of wealth inequality in the state of Massachusetts. And this study is going to focus not only on wealth inequality, but on racial wealth inequality specifically. And our goal, we're really in the planning phase right now, but we're going to partner with a survey firm to randomly sample and collect data from 5,000 households throughout the state. And the survey is going to be available online. People can take it by paper, or we'll also have a small number of in-person interviews for people that are particularly hard to reach. And the survey will also be translated into many different languages, so we want to make sure that people have the opportunity to take this survey and to take it in a language that they're comfortable in. So it'll be translated hopefully into Spanish, Chinese, Portuguese, and Haitian Creole. So we think that that's a pretty major advancement and going to allow us to reach many different types of households. And the main part of the survey, we're going to try to get a family balance sheet, essentially, from these 5,000 respondents. We're going to ask them about their assets and liabilities. And when I say assets, I mean things like their homes, cars, retirement assets, business assets. So one question we'll ask them is, what are the value? Do you have a business, and then what is its value? So you can imagine that might be something that's particularly difficult to figure out on the fly, but that is a question that we'll be asking. And then we're going to subtract out their liabilities, and this could be credit card debt, mortgages, home equity loans, student loans is a really big issue right now. That's something we're going to be asking about. We also heard that medical debt is a huge problem, so that's something that we're really interested in seeing if that's an issue here in the state of Massachusetts. And so in addition to estimating this net wealth, we're We're also going to ask a lot of questions about demographics. So we have a lot of different questions about race, ethnicity, ancestry, whether people were born abroad or not, because we think that all these things, will influence the wealth generating process. We're also interested in gifts and transfers. So, did you get help to pay for your education? Did you receive an inheritance or a gift from family members or friends? Do you have any plans to give wealth to other people, to future generations? Do you regularly give support to other people in your household or other family members or friends? So really trying to get a comprehensive economic picture for the whole household. And then we have really 3 goals that we're trying to accomplish. Earlier I showed a lot of national data, and I didn't show anything about Massachusetts. And the thing is, we don't really know a lot about wealth at the state level. And it's, a really kind of a blind spot for the country. And if you think about Massachusetts versus Mississippi, California, Florida, these are all very different locations and very different contexts. And we measure poverty at the state and local level, but why not wealth? And so this study is going to be one of the first to give us some really good estimates of wealth at the state level. We also hope to provide estimates for the greater Boston area and also the 26 gateway cities. So we're going much more in depth geographically than other studies do. If we get enough respondents, we're hoping to say something about urban, rural, and suburban wealth. So it'd be really interesting to look at wealth inequality within these different contexts. The other major focus area is racial wealth inequality, as I already alluded to. And you may have noticed that the other slides I showed, we didn't say anything about Asians. And again, this is a relatively small population nationally, although growing. And they're just not captured in the national data. And so our partner organizations have said, we need to know about this group in the state of Massachusetts. So we're going to have really good data, I'm hoping, for the Asian, Black, Hispanic, and white population. But then again, we know there's a lot of diversity and heterogeneity within these larger groups. People that, have lived here for generations versus those that have moved here more recently. So we're really hoping to find data on some, different subgroups, so particularly within the Hispanic, Asian, and Black community. So we think that that's going to be a really big advancement. And then the third goal is to be able to model policy changes. Just to give you an example, Biden's student loan forgiveness program is one thing that people are interested in knowing, what will the effect of this be on racial wealth inequality in our state. So that's something that we're hoping we can answer. Another big policy proposal is gaining traction in New England, our child savings bonds. And so that's something that, hopefully we'll be able to model the effects of. And I think, we'll also be able to do some counterfactual scenarios. So say what if people had the same education levels or employment levels, and how does this affect the racial wealth gap? These are all things we're very excited about. And President Hurst just mentioned that, the importance of action. And we're looking at this as research that informs bold action and hopefully creates real change, in Massachusetts, but also nationally and locally. And I'm going to stop there, and I think we have time for questions. Yes.
So in 2021, the Massachusetts Taxpayer Foundation did a study, and they indicated that from 21 to, 2026, the racial wealth gap was going to cost the Commonwealth $25 billion. If you had to guess, I know you're in the early stages of your survey, do you think that number is going to be larger now or smaller?
I would hesitate to offer an answer to that. So you're saying larger than it was in 2021? I could not venture a guess on that. Sorry. Yes.
You mentioned how comprehensive the study is going to be. My first question really is, what are the plans of deployment, for the study itself? Are you guys going to plan to partner with community organizations and because putting it online, sitting down 20 minutes, I'm just wondering if you guys have thought about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually have a pretty robust community engagement strategy, and our community engagement leader is here today, Maria. Raise your hand. So Maria just came back from a community dialogue, so she's hosting these events throughout the state to introduce the survey and to talk about it and tell people what we're doing, because we just don't want to like drop data on people out of nowhere. So we're really making a concerted effort that people know that this survey is happening. And so she's going to all these different communities throughout the state. We also have 2 advisory councils. One is made up of community members, so I think we have like 12 people from throughout the state, and they're participating on regular meetings and then also helping to arrange these community events. And so we do have these stakeholders. And then we also have a research advisory council. So these are people from the Boston area, but also nationally. These are mostly professors, people in the Federal Reserve System that have expertise in wealth that are kind of guiding the research. And then as far as the survey, I mean, so one thing is it will be random, and so we can't actually hand the survey to people. So they'll be getting a letter from this survey firm, and it'll explain kind of what we're doing, what we're trying to accomplish, and then direct them to take the survey online. And then there'll be like repeated follow-ups to try to get people to respond. And then finally, we're going to have like people will actually go out in person and interview people if they're not responding to the initial communications. I'm trying to think what else. And then I think for some of the smaller populations that we're trying to reach, that there might be some more on-the-ground community engagement if we are having trouble sampling them.
Hi, just a question for you. So in 2015, the Federal Reserve did a study that showed that the median net worth of African Americans was $8 versus $247,000 for white families. So I'm just curious, what action did you guys take to try to address that since 2015?
So that was a study, The Color of Wealth, and the Boston Fed participated in that. And we're hoping that this study provides some like more nuanced racial data and also has a much larger sample, so we can get, I'm hoping like more accurate estimates of that $8 figure. But I just started here about a year ago. But my understanding is that there was a lot of action that came out of it in terms of like organizations starting in the Boston area to really focus on the racial wealth divide. So I think that that's one thing that happened. It also so the fact that you know about this number, and I think it's pretty widely known in the state, like people know that this is a problem. The Boston Globe had a whole series, built around this $8 figure. And so I think it drew a lot of public attention to this issue. And, people said to us, like, this is a 400-year-long problem, and, like, how are you going to fix it? And I think, we're definitely taking the long view on it. So we're looking at this as, like, incremental action toward policy change. So I do think, the previous study did have a big impact in calling attention to this issue at the state level. And if you look at things like the baby bonds initiatives, they had been around for a little while, but they are gaining traction in New England. And so I think there actually has been some renewed efforts in this space. Maria, you want to add?
Yeah, and I no, this is fine. I don't think I need. I would add some a few other things. One thing that we heard as we started our engagement efforts after the Color of Wealth came out was a really, really strong need for more robust data for Massachusetts, because the Color of Wealth was so small and only for the Boston area, and the sample size was small. And so, in a lot of ways, the philanthropic commitment for this study is, in my mind, one of the things that came out of the Color of Wealth. And then I know there were other organizations who started programs as a result of this, BECMA being one of them, and the Pacesetters program from the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. So I think things have added on to each other. So I just want to highlight a few things and maybe invite others to share.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Really appreciate it. If you didn't know before now why we're here today, Mike just highlighted many of the reasons. And it's my pleasure, let me get through some of the slides, to now welcome another member of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, Keenan Grooms. There he is. Thank you, Keenan.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Keenan Grooms, and I am a senior analyst at the Boston Fed here, and really focusing on the community development side of things, as well as some of the outreach work that we're doing within the bank here. Really, today I'm going to want to present quickly on what's happening on our end with municipal procurement and the work we're doing on that, and really how we got into that work. And it seems like everyone's sufficiently caffeinated, so I hope we can have some conversations around this work and really bounce some ideas. And as we develop some strategies for it, we can really lead to some solution sets for the work happening here at the Boston Fed. And again, getting the legalese out the way before I get started, these are the views expressed by myself and myself alone. They do not necessarily represent those of the Boston Fed or the Federal Reserve System as a whole. And so what really is our vision for procurement on the municipal side in New England? And it's really focusing on cities and towns and how we can use municipal procurement as a tool and an economic tool to not only close the racial wealth divide, but strengthen those communities. So as we know, small businesses are the lifeblood of our communities here. What can we do around that work in order to ensure that Black and brown businesses are succeeding at those same exact levels? And from that level, then bring wealth to that. And so it's that theory of change around that work, that it's no longer just a budget line item for municipalities, where they're going to have to take on taking on large contracts at the cheapest rates. They're going to be strategic about how they make those placements, how they procure and look at contracts to better those communities that they're already committing to serve. And so most of you don't know me, but I'm a huge R&B guy. So really, this is my Deborah Cox slide here. And so how did we really get to this work? In our end, the good part is we're actually supposed to be here. So thinking about REMAP, and as a program that we created coming out of the Color Wealth Study, I know a gentleman asked what's happening on our end at the Boston Fed when we released this data about the huge disparity within wealth between Black Bostonians and white communities within the region. And so we looked at that and thought about what are some of our levers of change for that work. So we thought about from a research perspective, from a municipality perspective, what that means, and going deep down within municipalities where they know the capacity to do that change and are really committed to some of that type of work. And through that, we created our REMAP program, which is our Racial Equity Municipal Action Planning Council for Massachusetts. And it was a partnership program that we created with GARE, which is the Government Alliance of Racial Equity, and they're really the national leaders on this work, working with municipalities to develop equity plans, as well as working with Metropolitan Area Planning Council, also known as MAPC, and they're the planning and economic development agency for the Boston region. And through that, in 2015 or 2016 timeline, we decided we wanted to create the program where we'd provide technical assistance on our end, bring in some of those national leaders, develop some topical areas that municipal leaders as well as their staff members could take on to really close that racial wealth divide and provide economic opportunity for everyone. And so this started in 2016, as we know, working with governments, and here at the Fed, things are slow. And it started to develop that work. And then fast forward to the 2020-21 timeline, George Floyd gets murdered. And within the state, there's a priority and need to take on more of this work. So as we launched the program, we started with 6 municipalities here in Massachusetts, but that then quickly turned into bringing on the whole DEI coalition for municipal leaders in Massachusetts, and now we're working with 30 and 40 municipalities. And so as they're developing these equity plans, they've ranged from housing, security, to even working on municipal hiring practices to get folks into good paid union jobs and municipal jobs with pensions, to even doing community engagement work and developing a system to diversify boards and commissions. But what we were consistently hearing from municipal leaders, from mayors, town commissioners, to even community members that we spoke with, was that they weren't quite wrapping their head around what they could do around procurement. They didn't know the best practices. They really didn't understand necessarily what that looked like from a data perspective. And they're hoping the Boston Fed could figure out a way to bring the convenings together and become a resource and technical assistance around this type of work. So for us being on the community engagement team, we thought the best way to do that was to talk to everyone else and hear people who were the closest to that work, how they could take on some of these strategies there. So I think a lot of people are asking why we got into procurement and how that fits within the Boston Fed. And for us, it's really that dual mandate. So for the first mandate being stabilizing prices, which I think everyone sees on the news and a lot of people are complaining about it in terms of the interest rates. So I'll leave that to our economists here. They're a lot smarter than me. And I'll focus on our second mandate, which is really maximizing employment and how we see procurement fitting into that. And so we know all the research shows that for businesses of color, particularly black and brown businesses, they are more likely to hire black and brown folks. So as you strengthen those and bring contracts to those types of businesses, they're going to be hiring the individuals that historically have had the highest levels of unemployment rates. So because of that, it naturally fits into the work that we're already doing here at the Boston Fed. And then it fits into the fact that we want to strengthen these communities that traditionally have not been served. Also, opportunity to reduce the racial wealth divide. Mike did a great job explaining why that's important from a Shocks perspective, what wealth does in order to really beget more wealth. But we also see that as an opportunity for us, because we have good paying jobs, we have these contracts, we're building wealth for communities that we know have not been served in the past. And then large pool of unrestricted funds and what that means. So thinking about procurement from cities, state, and federal level, even in looking at stakeholder institutions and businesses, that's $2.5 trillion nationally that we see every year that are getting procured. Imagine if that slice on a municipal level was then going to the businesses and the communities and there's constituents there, and what that would do if you increase that X percentage. And then we know there's best practices already within our community. I mean, there's great programs happening. Maria mentioned Pacesetters here in Boston. Boston has some other great programs nationally. Charlotte, I think the National League of Cities has produced a great report on some of those best practices that are happening. So what can we do around replicating stuff that's already happening within our system and making sure that we can take those and remove barriers so from a regional level we can get those type of works done. And so our strategy and approach to this work, and it's a three-pronged process really to diagnose, design, and deploy. And I think these type of conversations that we're having today are perfect for that. So for our end, really what diagnose looks like is talking about who are these right folks in the room. So on our end, we've been doing a lot of the conversations with municipalities across the state and actually all of New England to see what their climate is, where some of their barriers are, where we can add value. This next step of that would be talking to folks and people in the room. So that whether it be MBEs or stakeholders, people closest to the work, to see what those barriers are right now, how we can push forward in some of that work, and what are some of those solution sets from a supply side and a demand side for us to get involved there. And then design, and mentioning again what that means for us from supply and demand. We're thinking about demand from a municipal perspective. So what can they do from policies and procedures to change in order to make sure that we can take on some of these contracts for black and brown businesses? And then the supply side, that's the talent pipeline, that's the MBEs, that's a lot of folks in this room here, right? How do we strengthen that from a technical assistance perspective? How do we provide support and resources so that then when they're ready to bid, they're capable of doing that, and not only being capable of bidding for these processes from a municipality perspective, but also being able to secure some of those contracts and fall through so they can do those hiring practices and continue to grow as an organization. And then deploy, which is where I think we're going to end later on today, and where I'm going to ask a lot of questions. What does that look like from an ecosystem perspective for us? If we're thinking about New England, what can we do? We have some great minds here in the room. What can we bring together as a group in order to ensure that these MBEs are going to take this to the next level, and that we're not just really talking about this process, we're bringing resources and technical assistance to the problems that we see. So getting into diagnosis, talking to municipalities, conducting some of this research on our end, and that's reading National League of Cities, HPR, even looking internationally from what type of procurement practices have worked in the past. I'll talk about some of the things that I'm hearing right now from cities and towns, but also wanting to hear from MBEs and what's worked and how that perspective is happening there. I mean, I know on my end, this worked really near and dear to my heart. My dad had his own company, and I saw all the hoops that he had to go through to work for the state and do procurement there. And so I've seen those firsthand, some of those barriers there, and I want to make sure that that's not seen anymore at the state and even at the New England level. And then really talking to some of these stakeholders who are really servicing, whether it be a SCORE or I mentioned Beckman in the past, to figure out how we can best support that type of work and create an ecosystem around that from New England wide and municipalities talking to these summit organizations so we can right size this work. And so I mentioned the demand side and supply side, some of those solutions we're hearing from municipalities' perspective. And this isn't an exhausted list. I think we just really wanted to highlight some of the key things that we're hearing right now, and would love to get your perspective later on too about some of those things from a barrier and a solution set perspective. First and foremost, data and being data driven. I was surprised to find out from municipalities that a lot of them are really not keeping track of who they're working with, the size of the company, and the race and ethnicity profile from that perspective. So that's something that we can take on as a larger group, even create some best practices of how they can implement that at a cheap cost for municipalities. And that can look from even not understanding or even creating the resources around doing a disparity study to build that business case for that type of work, to even creating processes when they're online that are streamed so they can get the race and ethnicity to see who they're doing the bids with right now. I know Boston has this, but sheltered market programs and the efficacy of that work happening there, that's one thing that's been brought up a few times with the municipalities that we've talked to. Many not knowing how they could do that, what legally that looks like for a municipality, and if they were to create that, how do they create a pipeline in order to ensure that organizations and MBs are applying and bidding for their services. I mentioned this before, but streamlining the bidding and payment process has been huge and has been keeps coming up over and over again. Folks want to get paid on time, and folks want to get paid quickly. And that's something we've consistently heard from municipalities. So we know, and if you've worked with any of these city governments, I'm not going to name names, but it can be archaic for that work to even apply for the process, to get paid, to go through the accounts payable process there. And these are huge businesses, and these are large contracts. You need the money to operate. So what can that look like from a best practice perspective in order to ensure that work's happening? And then unbundling large contracts. And I think that leads also back to the data. These municipalities don't know the size of the MBs that they're working with right now, and they don't know the ecosystem yet. Many of them don't, if they even could procure these larger contracts they have. So thinking about these contracts, if we're doing, say, janitorial services across a whole city, how can we unbundle those by neighborhoods to have more competitive bids, which from a perspective of municipality, the more bids you have, the larger supplier diversity. That's a more sustainable supply chain, and also can lead to cheaper bids because you're going to have more bids for competition there. So how can we unbundle some of these contracts in order to ensure that MBEs are able to apply for them? And then it's the supply side solutions, where I think some great things happening across the country and here locally, but really focusing on how, as a cohort in a community, we can build the capacity of these small contractors while also developing the pipeline services. I think Pacesetters has been mentioned in the past. They really have a matching program with businesses and MBEs and sort of figuring out the best way to how to actually work with some of these companies. Why can't something similar happen from a municipality perspective and do some of that type of work? And from technical assistance, work with municipalities so they can be consistent and clear about what needs to happen in order to take on and secure some of these contracts. And so this is the last slide where I have a lot of questions for everyone in the room, but really, what is the best system for us to create this, to deploy some of these resources and operationalize this work? So when we create some of these solution sets and we've developed some of these best practices, how then do we bring these together as a group in an ecosystem in order for us to thrive? And so that's creating those conditions to promote the work. How are we going to continue to build capacity? And what does it look like for us to achieve municipal buy-in? Talking to communities across the state, they're at very different levels of this work. So some being really bought in and understanding what that looks like. Others having champions within their city or town government, but not knowing how to present the business case for the work, or not knowing what the first step looks like. So are there peer learning models on our end? What's an effective learning model for us to really bring that together and share some of these best practices? And also, what is an effective model for us as a group to bring together resources in order to ensure that these things are happening there? So that's it on my end. I would love to hear any questions that people might have in the room.
I don't have a question, but I just want to make sure that everyone knows that my colleagues, Delisa Nova, Gary Stifler, Kadani Fresky, and Harold Blackwell, through grants we received from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the Minority Business Development Agency, we're helping minority businesses find opportunities with federal, state, and local governments and corporate buyers, and we're also providing a robust suite of capacity building services. Delisa, you might want to, sort of let everyone know what we're doing, because we're doing it right now, and the federal government has made a big investment in us as well as the Commonwealth to help us do it.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
So I'm still trying to figure out this thing, but very good.
You're good.
So to Peter's point, the Minority Business Development Agency out of Boston, we work with MBEs from Connecticut to Maine, helping them grow and increase capacity through different avenues. Capital, whether it's help with exporting or importing, whether it's, anything, procurement's one of them, both public and private. We have a lot of these conversations amongst ourselves with the community all the time. Problems here from the SDO office as well, great partner of ours. And I think it'll take us a lot of conversations in many different avenues to truly get to a lot of these questions. But one question I want to pose is, Peter mentioned this earlier, is altruism. A lot of people do things, why do they do them? And what is a true incentive other than we're doing good? I think we have to create some of those things to truly have people understand why this work is very important.
Yeah, and it's building that business case. And so when we talk to municipalities about that and thinking about the businesses within their community, as they build out the data and show that some of these communities have a significant portion of businesses of color. So from a mayoral perspective, you're serving your constituents when you're doing that work. So that's that narrative change around the work, that it's an economic development tool, and thinking about procurement, not just that budget line item that people throw to the side or like, oh, we got to do this, we got to make sure we have like the lights running, but really thinking about like, oh wow, this is how we strengthen our businesses and make our communities stronger. We're already working there.
Hi, first off, thank you so much for your presentation. My question is around the marketing of all of what you've found. I know the BPDA just did kind of a similar study, and there are other private foundations out there who are trying to gather the exact same information you have, and it seems a little bit like reinventing the wheel when a lot of what, I know you guys are working with municipalities, but this applies to the private sector as well, like the same solutions. How are you guys marketing this information and sharing it with others so that we're all kind of on the same page of what the problems and potential solutions are?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so for us, has been just internal to really understand what the ecosystem looks like. So Maria and myself are on the strategic engagement team there, so really focusing on what the strategy on that work looks like. But what we've heard talking to stakeholders as well as the municipal side is that when you get into a government perspective, it's very different from what a compliance level looks like for doing this type of works. So when you're thinking about large corporations, they don't necessarily have to deal with some of the requirements where if they want to set certain expectations for rules and demands and what that looks like from a competitive bid. I know I've talked to municipalities that says we can't change any of our processes. It has to be the cheapest one. And that doesn't have to be the case for private businesses. So it looks differently from municipality side, even from only working with certified minority businesses, which might be a requirement for a city or town, and in that perspective, looking at that as well. So I think we want to focus, and we haven't really started any of the market analysis work. We've only talked to municipalities and want to hear from the folks that are already doing some of this work right now and bring it on our end as we create what potentially could look like from that deployment perspective. Go here, and then you have after that. Yeah, I can talk about it. Doing well. I haven't seen you in a while.
And it's so great to be with folks here today. First of all, my role, I'm with the Supply Diversity Office, and my role is the Director of Government Relations and Community Affairs, but I'm also the Director of Diversity Small Business Engagement. And I got to share with you, there's a lot of great work that's taking place across the Commonwealth. And I think it's so important when you mention the municipalities that it's to understand the marketplace. Municipalities really leverage the statewide contracts. So they're really locked in. Not really locked in. This is how they spend money. So understanding that marketplace, particularly for our diverse suppliers, and also I like to say like the playbook. It's understanding, what are the rules of engagement, for engaging not just the state, the municipalities, and also the federal government. So just understanding sort of how that process works. One of the things that we're doing at the state is that we're establishing. First of all, our group has grown. Like we're one of the Commonwealth's newest executive agencies. So we grew from about 12 folks to about 30. All right, so we have a compliance department that's engaged and really trying to do the outreach and the marketing. So we have a whole engagement team that's working closely with Peter and his group, also the Women for Business organization as well. So we're doing cross-certification. We're really trying to limit those barriers as much as we can for certification. And one of the things we're doing around procurement that's really interesting is that when a procurement goes out to the world, what we're doing is we're reaching out to our 3,800 certified business owners and saying, okay, who wants to be involved with this procurement? Then we're bringing those folks in and doing what's called the vendor advisory meeting. So we're going to do a deep dive on that procurement to make sure they're as much prepared as they possibly can. And I also think we're breaking up the contracts is a great thing as well. Beckman's doing a great thing. We're having a vendor advisory council. So they're bringing cities and towns together, together, really looking at how do we really leverage opportunity. I think the city of Boston did a great job with their sheltered market program. That's another aggressive opportunity as well. So I just think that the more that we meet like this and really try to figure out ways to bring that ecosystem together is really a great thing. So I think we're doing some great work. So I'd love to meet everyone here and just make sure that we know that what the state's doing as well.
Yeah, Robert, and I love that. And if that's, and we're thinking about what the Federal Reserve's role is for that type of work. Because you talk about some of the state requirements and the programs there, and what does that mean from that perspective?
Yeah.
And so let us know what we can do.
Yes, please.
Yeah. There, and then.
Hey there, my name is Charles Kelsey. I'm Director of Access and Opportunity at DCAM. Just want to know, basically it's a question. What is the Federal Reserve doing to expand the ecosystem on the state level? I know you're talking a lot about municipalities, cities, and towns. A lot of minorities, MBW companies are doing work on the state level. So, interested to see what you have to say about, what type of work, or are you going to consider looking at, stuff on the state level?
Yeah. So we started. This really came out of our REMAP program, which was municipal focused, and that was really. From a demand side, it was these communities coming to us and understanding what that looks like from an equity perspective. So we have not yet looked at what that means from a state level, but we'll welcome that. And I think we think about what the learning model and how to best support that work. There's an opportunity for that to think about what the best practices look like from a state. So if there's great work happening, like what Rob's mentioning at the state level, how can we then bring them to cities and towns and have them talk together? Because these MBs can apply for city contracts and state contracts as well. No, we're gonna back there and then over to you.
Good morning. I'm Nadine Boone with the Small Business Administration here in Massachusetts. Okay. And I've heard this morning about access to capital, wealth gap, and now procurement. So, as you know, the Small Business Administration, I really wish we could get all of our stakeholders and small business owners to think of SBA as access to capital, because SBA helps small businesses to grow, to start, to grow, to expand. We have 3 C's, D, and E, which is counseling, access to capital, contracting, disaster assistance, as well as exporting. And SBA was truly a major player in COVID-19 recovery. And so I've not heard anything about the Small Business Administration and your collaboration with the United States federal government, because lots of data is being collected on who is and isn't getting access to all of these services. And we have a network of resource partners. I'm learning that our small businesses in procurement especially always want the contract, but they haven't even learned the process to being able to bid on the contracts. And how do we help them to understand that this is all a process? You can't wake up to last night and say, I want a contract today, and all of a sudden you are paying someone to complete your SAM profile for $599 when it's free. So,
and those are the barriers that that we're talking about, and identifying those as a group, and we start talking to each other, because some of those barriers at a federal level might look the same at the state level, city level, and even some of those private contracts. And developing that list and sharing that list within us as a group in the ecosystem, in order for then, from a provider and a TA perspective, they have that resource available for individuals as they're trying to get into that process and for procurement there. And then we'll be after that.
So my name is Kathleen Rowell, and I've been SDO certified as a WBE since 2009. Sure. I started my business in 2009. Can you hear me? Okay. I started my business in 2009. I'm the only woman-owned certified WBE in the state of Massachusetts. My services are union moving and storage. So I typically have a contract with Teamsters Local 25. All my work is pretty much in the business district here. I actually know Nadine. I love her. It's been a journey, almost 15 years. And just, I struggle every day trying to get opportunity. So whether you're MBE or WBE, I've gone to the resources. That Sam's gives me gray hair. I got WeBank certified. I got all the karate belts. But to navigate, to network, to come to events like this, to compete against a male industry, I'm on the City of Boston. I have a state contract. I'm in all the portals with general contractors versus, Moderna and the biotech. I see a lot of companies advertise everything. It's a facade, oh, women WBE and MBE. I get into that portal, they're still calling the same moving company that they dealt with for years. So it's a false advertisement, and it's frustrating, and some days I want to just hang it up. I started the office in my home with one truck. I grew. I can't even get into Harvard. I can't get into Northeastern. It's from the financial sector everywhere. There's flaws. And I know, something has to give for people. And you can keep doing the workshops and get the cards. I do the booths. I'm doing, I'm investing money. I've, earned my own money, and I've never got a loan from a bank. But it's so frustrating. It's so frustrating to say, oh, give us your card. Yep, we'll follow up. Nadine has always been there for me, and we're going through the whole stand with the assigned person. The government sector, what they're told, to me is, there's glitches or there's this, but it's so frustrating. And I hope things turn around, but I'm not happy in 15 years.
No, this is great, though. This is why it's so important that, timeliness is everything. There is a current moving, the state is just getting ready to open up their moving contract.
I'm already on it.
And you're on, okay, so great. So you're on the statewide contract. Okay,
Yep.
excellent. Now, again, understanding the marketplace and how the state spends money. You can be directly on the contract with the state, you can be a subcontractor, or you can be ancillary. And this is where the certification comes in with the state. Folks got to understand how the program works with the state. It's not a direct spend with the executive agency. So I say all that to say that you and I should talk, but the fact that you're on that contract is huge. It's just
But
giving you
we're doing a
opportunities is what-
walkthrough now,
yeah.
like in Sturbridge, and I have to share with them. I'm a union, so we
Gotcha.
can't honor prevailing wages. So I'm the only woman owned on that, and two are union. But Federal Reserve had a bank of relocation, and I didn't get opportunity to bid.
And I think it's
which
great.
is disappointing.
It is disappointing.
I think those are the type of connections we need to make, and thinking about what an ecosystem looks like here in New England for that work. I just want to bring it over. Question. Yeah?
Well, sure. I sympathize with this, and I'm in the supplier diversity industry. There are a lot of frustrations, and there's a lot of thought that we're not doing enough, and that's one reason I really applaud some of these objectives that you have. And one of them I just want to underline, which is so important, is the payment issue. And the payment issue, not everybody realizes, is very much connected to your other objective, which is employment. because studies show that if the payments take place in a timely manner, then small firms are able to increase employment, which is what we're all trying to do. In fact, on a national basis, any day, there's something like $3 trillion owed to small businesses by corporations. They're taking a credit line from these small businesses, and it's bad for anybody, and it's worse for people of color. So I want to applaud you for looking at the payment issue, and I just want to underline how important it is that we really move that forward. It's one of the easiest, there's technology issues, there's all kinds of infrastructure, but it's having a small business avoiding taking a loan. It is so easy for that to happen, for those quicker payments. So please follow through on that, and that's all I wanted to comment on.
Yeah, and that's such an important point. I think we've talked to cities and towns, and businesses talk to each other. So from municipal side, if they hear that, oh, it's going to take you 2 months to get paid back, they won't even go and approach the bid because they don't have the resource to do that. They can't pay staff to take on that bid. And so that's one thing. National League of Cities, I encourage you, they developed a best practice list of what's working in municipalities across the country. One of those from a payment side was, I'm blanking on what city it was, but they guaranteed payment between 2 to 4 weeks on every single project. And what that meant from MBEs to applying for those municipal bids, it was huge.
So federal government has what is called a Prompt Payment Act. And what small business owners need to understand also is that when they complete a contract, that they don't get paid until the government accepts it. Now, I'm speaking from the federal government level. And Kathleen, thank you for sharing some love, because there are many who hate me. And I'm gonna put it out here in the environment, because Rob started this. While you are getting gray hairs working with Sam, then those who have already gone through those processes, subcontract. Look at the subcontracting arena to find out if you really want to be in this space before you start to invest in too much time and any money. And so that is a way to go from the bottom up. And every one of our prime contractors have subcontracting plans, or just about all of them, where they have to hire the woman-owned small business, the service-disabled veteran-owned small business, a hub zone. Again, I'm speaking you to from the federal level, the small disadvantaged business. SBA certifies socially and economically disadvantaged small businesses. The word minority is not in my language at the federal level, thankfully. They certify 8 A's, and yet the government-wide procurement scorecard measures it as a small disadvantaged business, although there is no certification at the federal level for a small disadvantaged business. So we just need to have more of these conversations to really, really hear and see and learn the process. Sam will give you gray hairs. It's not like going to Macy's, signing up, giving them your social security number, and walking away with your bag and a new credit card. It is not like that by any stretch. And then once you are registered, you're not even certified yet to bid on contracts. So you have to figure out where do you fit in the ecosystem. And so it is difficult for me to wake up and show up knowing how many disgruntled individuals, and we, federal government, again, have a huge network of resource partners. Everything has been virtual. A lot of it is still virtual to help you to navigate this. This is not a solo process.
I'm freezing. I am so cold.
Thank you, Kaden, and thank you, everybody. I wish we could continue the conversation, but want to move forward in our program. So right now we do have our networking break. So feel free to get up, stretch your legs. There are refreshments in the back of the room as well as outside the room, and we will all come back together at 11:15. Thank you. Thank you all. It's my pleasure to introduce Bo Zhao, who's going to talk you guys a little bit about economics. Don't worry, it'll be at our level. But thank you, Bo. Appreciate your time today.
Oh, thank you. Thanks a lot. I'm very glad to participate this first financial summit. Today, I'm going to present an overview of recent economic conditions for the United States and the New England states. A usual disclaimer applies. The views I talked about today is just my own. It doesn't represent this bank or the Federal Reserve System, so all errors are mine. And I'm going to present you some economic indicators to give you some sense about the labor market, housing market, consumer confidence, and some measures of inflation. So hopefully you can get some big picture about how the economy is working right now. Okay, let's first look at the job market. This figure shows you the evolution of non-farm payroll employment in recent years for both the United States and New England states. And just so usually we use a reference point so then you know where we are in terms of the compared to the history. So here in this case, I index everything to the pre-pandemic level. So you can see here. So I use the February 2020, that's right before the pandemic, as the basis. This is indexed to be 1. And so then you can see at the beginning of the pandemic, there's a sharp decline in non-farm payroll employment. And after the beginning of the pandemic, we see a quick improvement in non-farm payroll employment. And in March 2023, you can see on the top, this line represents the United States as whole. You can see that now the national non-farm payroll employment has fully recovered, actually is above the pre-pandemic level, is 2% higher than the February 2020 level. And because all the New England states is below the U.S. as a whole, you can see what doing a little bit worse than the nation as a whole. But still, you can see there are 3 states that are above this February 2020 level. That's New Hampshire, Maine, and Massachusetts. New Hampshire's March 2023 employment level is 1.6 higher than the February 2020 level. And these 3 states, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Vermont, they still haven't fully recovered the job losses during the pandemic. In particular, Vermont's payroll employment in March 2023 is still 2.5% lower than the pre-pandemic level. Now let's break the employment by industry. So we can see, which sector has fully recovered, which hasn't, and to get some sense what has been driven the trend in employment. Here I'm comparing the February 2020 level. I'm seeing the change, looking at the change from February 2020 to March 2023. The gray bar represents the New England states, the New England region as a whole, and the blue bar represents the United States as a whole. You can see on the top, 2 sectors, professional and business services and construction sectors. These 2 sectors are currently employing more people than before the pandemic. For example, in the New England region, the number of jobs in professional and business services is 7.8% higher than the number in February 2020. But on the other hand, these 3 sectors, government, other services, leisure and hospitalities, these 3 sectors still experiencing job losses compared to the pre-pandemic level. In particular, the leisure hospitality sector for this region was still 5.4 percentage points in the red. And this sector requires close in-person contact, so not surprisingly has been hit hardest by the pandemic. Well, now let's look at the unemployment rates. And the big picture is with employment growth, we see the unemployment rate has dropping sharply compared to the peak during the pandemic-induced recession. And currently, the United States unemployment rate is at 3.5%. The region as a whole, we're doing better than the nation as a whole. The New England unemployment rate is 3.4%. It's 1.1 percentage point below than the national unemployment rate. In March 2023, within the region, Connecticut has the highest unemployment rate, is 4%. And at the bottom, you can see that New Hampshire has the lowest unemployment rate, is 2.4%. And just try to give you some sense how low it is. So nationwide, the lowest unemployment rate belongs to South Dakota, is 1.9%. New Hampshire has the 6th lowest unemployment rate. This is pretty low. Now let's compare to where we were before the pandemic, and you can see actually the national unemployment rate just returned to back exactly where we were before the pandemic. So in February 2020, the U.S. National unemployment rate was 3.5%. So now we exactly got back to where we were. And within the New England, 3 states, New Hampshire, Maine, and Rhode Island, their unemployment rate actually is lower compared to the pre-pandemic level. So they're actually deeper, lower. And about 3 other states, their unemployment rates are still higher than the pre-pandemic levels. Well, the declining unemployment rates are partly driven by the tight labor supply associated with the declining labor force participation rates. Is this like because of the fewer people in the labor force, so it makes the labor market looks tighter. You can see during the pandemic induced recession, the labor force participation rate dropped sharply, and then after that, it gradually improved for some states. And so in March 20, but still the labor force participation rates still haven't fully recovered, both for the nation and for the New England states. The national labor force participation rates is still 0.7 percentage point lower than the pre-pandemic level. And the New England states are doing worse than the U.S. as a whole in terms of the recovery in labor force participation rates. One state I want to highlight is you look at Maine. The pre-pandemic, in the pre-pandemic period, the labor force participation rate is here. I mean, now is here is 2.5. I think is 3.8 percentage points lower than the pre-pandemic level. Part of the reason for the worse recovery of labor force participation rates for New England state is aging population. I mean, population aging. This region we have the oldest population compared to other parts of the country. So you see, even before the pandemic, we have this long, slow declining trend. So, during the pandemic and since pandemic, certainly population is getting older in the region. So that's part of the reason. The other part of the reason is a among the older population, we see fewer older people are still working. So there is a phenomenon is like more people, older people had an early retirement. In the normal time period, they're probably still working, but the pandemic, the health condition triggered a lot of people went into retirement instead of continue working. So now let's switch gear, look at the housing market. In this slide, I'm showing you year-over-year house price appreciation rate. This is the annual price growth. You can see that since 2022, the pace of the price growth has dropped sharply, both for the United States as a whole, which is the blue line, and for the region, for the New England region. This is mostly driven by the sharp increase in mortgage interest rates. So we have seen the volume of mortgage applications have declined because it's getting more expensive to pay the monthly mortgage payment. But at the same time, you have to keep in mind, even with this decline, the annual price growth rate is still positive. This is zero. Where's zero? This is zero. This is zero here. So this is still positive. This is still around 8%. If we look back, you can see that since the beginning of 2012, every single quarter since the beginning of 2012, the United States has seen positive annual price increases since then. So it has been a long period of house price increases. And for the New England region, it starts from the end of the last quarter of 2012. So the whole region also seen a very long period of house price increases. So despite the recent recession, house prices definitely getting more and more expensive. So this slide do an annual comparison. I'm comparing the house prices in the last quarter of 2022 with the same quarter, but in a year ago. You can see that the house prices increased around 8%, both in the nation and in the region. So, while a little bit lower than the nation as a whole. Within the region, Maine saw a double-digit house price increases. And this is something we have seen that is partly driven a change in the migration pattern. We have seen more people are moving into Maine and Vermont because they're leaving the urban area, dense urban areas, and they're chasing, they want a bigger space, and the remote work arrangement allows that to happen. So a lot of people go into these places, and so they can buy bigger houses and find, because those places are cheaper, and also child care costs are cheaper. And this is also at the same time that the price increases are also partly driven by the historic, very tight housing supply. We have seen the chronic low inventory of houses for sale. So to give you a data point, is in the Boston area, the available existing homes for sale is only enough for 1 month housing supply at the current pace of home sale. So this is really low. Usually economists think it is like you have a 6-month housing supply. That's the normal. It's like, it's a normal. But, we have seen this tight housing supply for quite a long time. The new construction is just couldn't keep up with the housing demand because of mortgage rate has been low, really low for a long period. So there's a lot of demand. And because of the recent mortgage interest rate increase, a lot of people don't want to sell because they want to lock in their really low mortgage interest rate. If they sell now, they have to apply new loans, they have to pay much higher mortgage interest rate. So they don't have really incentive to sell. So that creates this interesting dynamic. Now let's look at the inflation. Here, I measure inflation by looking at the year-over-year change in consumer price index. We usually abbreviate it as a CPI, and you probably have seen this number in the news a lot. So the blue line represents the United States as a whole, and this purple line represents the New England region, and the green line represents the Greater Boston area. You can see that since September 2022, and by the way, these slides are available. I was already sent it to the organizer. You feel free to ask for a copy. All the data are public available, so nothing confidential. So you don't need to take a picture. So feel free. You will get a copy if you want. So since September 2022, the inflation rate has been declining for the Boston area, and the decline happens 3 months even earlier for the nation as a whole and for the region as a whole. But despite the recent decline, we see that this inflation rate measured by the change in CPI is still much higher than where we were before the pandemic, and it's also higher than the 2% target that we would like the inflation to be. And between March 2022 and March 2023, the change in CPI is 5% for the nation as a whole, and is 4.7% for the Greater Boston area. If we break it down, look at each component of this index, we can see that prices for fuel and utilities in the Greater Boston area increased 22% over the 1 year period. And this is largely driven by a huge increase in electricity prices. It's 45% increase. So if you look at your utility bills, you probably saw it. You use less electricity, but you're paying higher electricity bills. And also the food prices increased a lot for the Greater Boston. It's about 9%, but at one point it's 11%. So we already saw a decline, but it's still high. And the shelter prices for the Greater Boston area is almost 7%. That's the rent. And on the other hand, the transportation prices declined more than 2% for the Greater Boston area. This is driven by two factors. One is the prices for the used cars and trucks dropped. I think it's dropped more than 11%. Remember, during the pandemic, the used cars and trucks is just so limited, so the price increased a lot, but now has dropped compared to a year ago. And also the gasoline price also dropped in the Greater Boston area compared to a year ago. It's more than 20% decline. Finally, let's look at the consumer confidence. The blue bar represents the April last year, and the gray bar represents this April, the last month. And you can see that for both the United States and the region as a whole, we saw a slight decline in consumer confidence. And that's decompose this consumer confidence to see, what happens. Consumer confidence index consists of two components. One is called the present situation index. This is based on the consumer's assessment of current business condition, labor market, income. And another component is called the future expectations Index. This is based on the consumer's outlook for the next 6 months, how they think about business conditions, their income, their job market. So you can see that the decline in consumer confidence is basically entirely driven by the worse future expectations compared to a year ago. You see here, this is a decline. So it means that people are concerned about it. A particular concern is about the inflation. People keep cited about it. Okay, just to conclude that, the big picture is we saw labor market continues to recovery from the pandemic. We saw the non-farm payroll employment increase for the nation, and some New England states, they have fully recovered. They got higher employment numbers compared to before the pandemic, and we saw the unemployment rates have been declining. The big picture is that, but there are still some challenges and risk. If you look at by industry, you see some sectors still haven't fully recovered. In particular, leisure and hospitality industry, they're still hiring fewer people than the pre-pandemic level, and labor force participation rates are still lower, and that's a concern. Housing inventory for sales is still very low. It's chronic. That put upward pressure on house prices. Despite the recent decline, inflation rate is still elevated. We would like to see it to decline further, and hopefully it will get back to the 2% soon. And consumers are more concerned about futures compared to a year ago. So, so this is my presentation, and if you have questions, I'm happy to answer as best as I can. Yep.
Yeah, my question more contains the labor market, because that's a growing concern for any of our business owners, et cetera. So, you mentioned, the aging population's out of the labor market. You also have the other challenge with a lot of working mothers not being able to, or fathers being able to go back in the workforce because of the cost of daycare today. So is it a time where the Fed should look at what's adjustment to the unemployment rate as a basis? In other words, there's always been here's what zero unemployment looks like. Should it be an adjustment made to consideration of those two factors? Because I don't see that coming back. I mean, aging population the baby boomers generation is what's causing this. Generations coming after that, there's less people. You've got people can't go back in the workforce because of the cost of daycare. So I think the unemployment rate basis needs to be looked at. I mean, does that make any sense, logic?
That's a very good question. Actually, it touched a theme of this year's research department, the Whole Banks conference. We're looking at what does maximum employment really means. So we're not the one who construct this unemployment rate measure. This is the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics. But they do have some other measures, like they look at the marginally attached workers, people who want to work full-time, but they couldn't find job. They look part-time. It's partly related to the child care responsibilities. But even with that measure, we do see there's still a decline in the unemployment rates. So it doesn't, by using different measure, it doesn't change the big picture. But still, I hear you. Definitely, there's concerns about high child care costs. I think that's something. I think that's something we'll carefully look at it, and definitely affect how we think about maximum employment means. Yep. But also at the same time, I have to say, this region, we see more and more older people, but the offsetting factor is we have really high education attainment. So that's a positive side, because we see on average highly educated people have higher labor force participation rate. So for the older people, if they have higher education level, they tend to stay labor market longer. So there's two forces that work against each other. And because of the pandemic induced the health risk, so a lot of older people just decided that they're going to retire. But we don't know if they will reverse their decision when the health situation become like a clearer, so they feel safer to come out. So we don't know yet. We are monitoring it.
All right.
Yep.
Hi, Brendel. I just wanted to ask, was there any consideration for the commercial real estate and that impact? Because here in the region, specifically Boston, we have a lot of vacant office spaces, a lot of vacant industrial spaces as well, and how that could have had an impact on both labor in the region and elsewhere, and what was the price increase and how did that affect the job market as well? Because during the pandemic, as you see, there's a lot of people who did work from home. And then there's a lot of offices who did layoffs and other people who just said you can do permanent work from home. And was there any consideration for those migrations of people who lived out of state but worked here, and then the reduction of those jobs, but then the skyrocketing in the price of real estate post-pandemic?
Yes, I don't have a slide here, but we do look at the office vacancy rate by urban and suburban, and we have seen there's a lot of is a pressure on the office space providers, especially within the city, because the remote work allow a lot of people to work at home, so they have less demand for office spaces, especially in the central business district, and they put a downward pressure on rents. But now we have seen a trend that more and more businesses want to bring their workers back to their offices. So we don't know how successfully they can do that. So certainly, commercial real estate sector is under a lot of pressure. Yeah. Questions? Oh, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Bo. Appreciate it. So now we're going to give you guys some insights onto how lenders make their decisions. So I'd like to welcome up Delisa Nova, Patrick Laurent, and Sarah Halpern.
So again, thank you so much for having us. And we are the panel between lunch. So we promise a great conversation. So both of you guys, thank you so much for coming. Very briefly, I'll mention Sarah. Sarah Halpern is president and CEO of the Boston Consortium Fund and Triad Investments. Sarah started her career in international microfinance, and before that, after that, spent 15 years with Schwab. Sarah, thank you so much for being here with us. And Pat is currently the SBA operations manager leading the PPP payroll protection program for M&T Bank. And I'm going to get right into it because my boss is right there and he's like, no commercials. So first, what is the Boston Consortium Fund, CDFI, and the difference between a CDFI and a bank?
So it's actually the Business Consortium Fund. Although we are in Boston, we do. Is this working?
Push, right? And then the green light.
Okay. Is that working? No. Is this working?
Some technical difficulties. Maybe you can take mine.
Thank you. There we go. The Business Consortium Fund is a community development financial institution, And we were formed by the National Minority Supplier Development Corporation back in 1987 to provide financing to business owners of color who have contracts in supply chains of companies and within government organizations. And we provide loans up to $1 million to MBEs. And we also provide advisory services, technical advice for free. What makes a CDFI different than a bank is that we are more accommodating of smaller, growing businesses that maybe have had a down year, that perhaps don't have the same amount of cash flow or income that a larger business would have. Another differentiating factor between us and a bank is that over time, as your business experiences the ups and downs of early growth, we're not required to write a loan off or put it into default. What we're able to do is work with each client to really ensure the success of the business. And that's why we're here. We are certified by the U.S. Treasury Department as a community development really advocate in an organization that helps small businesses grow.
Thank you, Sarah. And Pat, one of the big questions that we have is when you're starting a business, when you are in the midst of running your business, when is it a good time or a bad time to get on debt, to take on debt?
So, can you hear me?
Sorry.
Let's try this.
No, I got it. Sorry. A little technical difficulty here. Sorry. So, good time. I would say at the beginning of your business, right? It's always advisable to borrow what you need. Too many businesses go into business and they either borrow too much or too little. And they find themselves at the time that they really need the money, right, to go back to the bank, now it might be too late. So that might be the bad time to lend, right? When you probably sometimes the most need it, right? But you're showing inability to pay back the loan, perhaps, is probably a bad time to go to the bank and look for debt. So I would say, I always advise companies to really look at their budget and look, 6, 12 months in advance of what's going to happen to your business, and borrow what you need, raise the money that you need, because when 6 months down the line, a year down the line, now you're growing and you need money and you're going and you need debt, that may be a difficult time to go to the bank and try to borrow then.
Thank you. And that's actually a great segue to our next question. Borrow what you need, look at and do it before you need it, you mentioned. Mm-hmm. So how do you know what you need, though? One of the things that we have conversations about is the fact that not all loans are the same. Not all types of loans are the same. You may look at different things, and one of the big differences is that CDFIs have the potential to lend different types of lending vehicles. And Sarah, so what kind of loans are there?
We provide working capital loans, we provide equipment financing, and we look at the income that you as a business might expect to receive from a contract. So if you have a new contract with a large corporation and you're expecting dollars to come in, we will lend with that cash flow in mind. Did I mention working capital as well? So one thing that's really important also is that your loan has a purpose, right? We all need a purpose that drives us forward. Your loan needs a purpose. And that's how you know how you can repay it. You need to know what your cash flow is to come back in to repay that loan. One thing that we're really keen on at Business Consortium Fund is that every dollar that you take in must be purposeful and must be able to be paid back. You don't want to be borrowing against kind of yesterday's problems. You have you made a decision that resulted in an issue and you need to cover some cash flow. you probably want to look at other ways to cover those gaps. For loans, they're really forward-looking. They are like you're saying, looking into your future. Loans are for future growth. So we look at a variety of different types of financing vehicles for your future growth.
So, Sarah, one of the financing vehicles that you mentioned that you guys have is this future receivables part of it. And Pat, I know that a lot of banks, it's not what you will be getting, but sort of what you have gotten. And you mentioned working line, there are lines of credit. Would you tell us a little bit more about the types and kind of why you would need which one?
Sure. So there's short-term needs, and then there are long-term needs, and you want to match that up, right? So if you're looking for a short-term need, right, it would typically be a line of credit, and that line of credit would be supported by short-term assets such as receivables, inventory, right? Versus a long-term need, you may be in a growth span, stage in your business, and so you don't want to mix up short-term with long-term, right? As you are using that line, right, you buy receivable or you fund receivables, right? You get them paid, and then you pay down the line. You go up and down on it, right? There's usually, most banks will require a cleanup period to prove that it was being used for short-term purposes versus long-term, right? Maybe you have a new project or you're expanding into another business, and you need longer than a year to pay it back. So that's a long-term purpose. So you always want to match your needs, your short-term needs versus your long-term needs. So, my colleague just mentioned, there's lines of credits, there's term loans. Term loans are usually long-term needs. Mortgages, long-term needs versus lines of credits or short-term needs.
Thank you, Pat. So we can agree that you need a lot of things when you apply. And sometimes we don't know what those things are. And we can also agree that both banks and CDFIs look for very similar things. Sarah, what are those things?
As you enter into a relationship with any lender, I think the most important thing is to know yourself as a business, right? So you need to understand what your balance sheet looks like. What are your current assets? What are your current liabilities? How much cash do you have on hand? You also need to understand your weekly, monthly, quarterly cash inflows and outflows. You really need to understand your income statement. And these are the things that we look at. We look at ability to pay, because if you're unable to repay this loan, you're going to find yourselves in trouble, and we're going to find ourselves in trouble as well. So the documents that we look at are really to help you and to help us understand your ability to repay that loan. So we look at bank statements. We look at tax statements. We want to understand your management history and your successes, and really even your failures. And we want to talk about your failures also, and what you learned from them, and what new practices, procedures, et cetera, that you've put in place to prevent or to mitigate risk of that happening in the future. So those are the basic requirements that we look at. And one thing that we understand also as a CDFI, people of color are, I would say, not suspicious perhaps of financial markets overall, because our experience is that we get turned down more often, we have higher rates, we get lower loans approved, and that's all backed up by data. So we understand that giving us all this information, it feels personal, right? It feels like you're opening up your lives and your books to us, which you are. So that's another thing that we as a CDFI really understand. And, we also all have the personal and lived experience that our borrowers do.
So one of the things you mentioned, Sarah, is that You guys look at the failures, want to have this conversation. I was in banking for 13 years prior, and if it didn't work, it didn't work, and we didn't have a conversation. So Pat, so with that said, now I've decided I want to get a loan. I understand my finances. I understand what kind of loan I want, and it is a good time to borrow, right? It goes into underwriting. And what are your underwriters looking at? I know, Sarah, you mentioned ability to repay and things like that, but your regular banking, not the CDFI is going to hold your hand and teach you certain things, but a bank, what are you looking at?
I mean, you hit it on the nose. So we're looking chiefly your ability to pay back. So that's the first thing. You know, what I would say to really review your financials and understand how a bank determines your ability to pay. Typically, the bank was going to lend you, for every dollar you lend, they're looking for $1.20 that you make. You know, 1.2 coverage. That's the typical debt service ratio that a bank is looking for. CDFIs may be a little bit more lenient, you know, maybe even a 1-to-1. Bank is looking for a little cushion, right? So the other thing that we're looking for, and is really a critical part of the credit analysis, is the individual's wherewithal to run the business. You know, business doesn't run itself, the person runs it. So we are looking at you personally. And so we're looking at your personal credit history of how you've handled your credit is critical with a privately owned business. You know, when you're talking about going out into the market, you know, most people make the misunderstanding that, you know, I'm going to incorporate myself and I'm going to insulate myself from the company that I develop. But frankly, that just doesn't happen when you go to lend. The bank is going to look at the business ability to pay and look at the personal wherewithal of the individual owners as well. So debt service, we also are looking for, now if it doesn't work out, what are the underlying assets that we're financing? And so depending on the type of loan that you're looking for, the bank will lend you a certain percentage of that loan. Short term is typically, you know, the receivables, inventory, there'll be a certain percentage of the loan. Long term, we're talking about equipment and real estate, typically about 75 to 85% of the value is what the bank is going to lend against. Those are the typical things that the bank is going to look for.
Yeah, and with that, collateral, and very, very important. And Sarah, what is collateral?
So collateral is, I mean, to put it short, it's what you're pledging to us in case the loan goes bad, right? So if it's real estate, it's your house or your business assets. And as Pat was saying, banks usually lend 75 to 80%. So if you have a warehouse or whatever that's valued at $1 million, they'll lend $750,000. A CDFI will go higher. We'll usually go to 90%. But all of the same things that you mentioned, we look at too. But our ratios are just a little bit more generous, I suppose. So we'll lend a higher amount loan to value. We'll look at a little bit less of cash flow coverage on your what's known as debt to income. And all of these terms are so important to know and to be fluent in before engaging in any financial transaction or financial knowledge. So collateral, yes, it's very important. And that, that also allows us to know that we're in this together, that the business owner is willing to put a piece of themselves or their business into this transaction. And that's really important for us because we too definitely need to get repaid so that we can continue in our mission of serving more and more business owners of color.
So one of the things that you both mentioned is putting a piece of you, right? And that's kind of scary. We're not asking for blood samples. That's not what we're necessarily talking about. But personal guarantees. what are personal guarantees and what could they be, Pat?
Sure. So typically, the bank is going to require your unlimited personal guarantee. So that means that for the loan that the business is taking out, you're personally guaranteeing that loan. And it could be also a limited guarantee where it is only limited to the underlying collateral that you offer for the loan. So personal guarantee, as I said, is a critical part of small business lending. Usually if you have like I say, a privately owned business, you could always expect to personally guarantee. And I will say that, most banks will have that if you own more than 20% of the business, then you are always that person that owns more than 20% of the business is going to guarantee the loan, So
you don't own your house. What can you personally guarantee?
So there's, other types of collateral that you can offer. It might be cash surrender value of life insurance, right? I'll say that, we talked this morning, a number of people talked about the equity available to minority MBEs, right? We are at a disadvantage, right, when it comes to equity. It's just a proven fact. And so one of the things that most banks will do is use the Small Business Administration. I think someone mentioned that earlier. So we at M&T are, one of the largest SBA lenders in the country. And that's what we would look to because many borrowers, right, across the board may not have the collateral that we're looking for. Typically, it's, I mentioned some of the ratios, right? So you may not have that. So we look to shore that up with some type of either government guarantee program, or it might be a local, state-based program that would be able to shore up the collateral that you may not have.
Thank you. And let's assume that I got a yes, right? The personal guarantee was good, my credit was good, all those things worked out. Now I have a term sheet in front of me. And in that term sheet is all of the things. Should I be celebrating right after I get my term sheet, Sarah?
No, you should definitely look at that term sheet and understand everything that it entails. One thing that we look for is, I mentioned earlier, sometimes we'll lend to a borrower, especially these days. The COVID period just happened. We just saw all those stats. We have businesses that had a couple of down years. So we'll say, you need to get your total debt to total assets down to this amount by year 3 of the loan or year 2 of the loan. Or you need to get your cash flow cushion up. So you really need to look at that and understand, and if it's you or if it's your accountant or even if it's your attorney, if you have access to professionals like that, then you need to understand, can I do it? Because once you have the guarantee, once you have the collateral, you need to make sure that you can abide by the conditions of the loan. Never just sign on the line. Always review it very carefully.
And these conditions typically are called covenants in that loan. Pat, what are some of the covenants that you have seen or that you put or that maybe may be atypical?
So some of the key covenants would be, one is a debt service covenant. So, I talked about short-term, and typically it's on short-term type of debt. So, like, for instance, if you have a line of credit annually, the bank is going to have a covenant that you submit financials annually, so personal and business. And so they will review those those financials and make sure that you are within the covenants or the debt service covenant that they issue for your loan. So that's one. It may be a liquidity that you stay, you have a certain amount of liquidity. And so you'd have to take a look at the underlying documents that you're signing and make sure that, you're not setting yourself up for failure, There may be covenants for, the underlying assets that you're borrowing. Again, mostly it's on lines of credits, right? That or short-term types of facilities that covenants are on. And I'll tell you that, many of the banks, regional, national banks, and even some of the smaller banks don't really even put covenants on loans like, let's say, 250 and under, because most of those loans are frankly scored based, right? If you meet that score criteria, right, the expectation is that you can handle that credit. But loans over a certain dollar amount, if you're looking for $250,000 and $250,000 and up, typically there are going to be covenants that you have to be aware of. So it could be another covenant of, let's say, that they limit your salary. They say that, we want to see you.
That's an important one, guys.
That you, right, are able to service the debt first, and then beyond that, you can take out a personal salary. So that's a key covenant, right? Because you're working to get, right, to make money, right? So if you have a covenant that's saying that you can only take out X amount of money, that's a key covenant. One last one I'll say is capital expenditures, that you can only spend X amount annually on capital expenditures. So if you're a growing business, that's a key covenant, right? That you need to expand, let's say, each year, depending on the type of business you are, right? You don't want to agree to a covenant that will limit you to the to capital expenditures that you spend annually.
So, as we see, it's not easy to get a loan or to get any debt. But if you finally do get it, then you may not even want to sign because you're being limited by these covenants and other things. And I do want to give some time for Q&A, but I do want to end with one question to both of you. And Sarah, I'll let you take this one first. So we have already spoken about what some of these look like, but I want to bring them up and kind of mention them even further. What are some of the obstacles that you see with NBEs in the process of getting to a yes and being able to get credit? And what could we do about it?
Yeah, I mean, this is extensively documented. There are, in my view, there are three different things that that prevent MBEs from seeking loans and getting capital. The first one is actually just reluctance to engage, and for the reasons I talked about before. We in communities of color, we say, I can do it myself. I don't need your help because we've seen what's happened in the past and, don't need your help. But so that, and actually studies show that people of color who have higher credit scores than white people are less confident that they're going to get a loan. And is that with basis? Maybe, maybe not. But there's just a reluctance to walk into the credit process. So that's the number one barrier, just not engaging, right? But then the other ones are structural. Pat talked about collateral. People of color have fewer assets in general than white people. So you have fewer assets to lend against. Also, people of color tend to be in businesses that have lower margins. Why? Because they have less to invest in upfront. So we have a cyclical problem that just reinforces itself. So those are the three reasons, again, extensively backed up by data. But what we all need to do is be willing to engage in this process, be willing to get the debt and get the equity that we need at the beginning to grow, because studies also show that if you have those resources, those capital resources in the beginning of your business cycle, you're going to be more successful.
Thank you, Sarah. That was great. Pat?
Yeah, no, I would echo, right? Those are the key reasons. But I'll say that, being prepared, right? Knowing the answers before they are even asked. Yeah. You don't want a banker to bring up an issue that you don't know about. You should just, whether it's your credit, whether it's something on your balance sheet, whether it's like a concentration on your receivables, whatever it is, right? you should be prepared. And it's across the board. It's not even, I'll tell you, the minority community struggles with this, but it's across the board that people are just not prepared when they come into the bank to borrow, So it's, not trying to be everything, right? You're kind of like, you don't want to be the master of all. You want to just concentrate on what you know. So having a good accountant, a good attorney, right? A good consultant, someone you can go to talk about prices. All these things will come into play because, the first thing I mentioned about personal wherewithal, it's knowledge, right? We all can't know it all, right? But we could focus on just our business. So, getting the help that you need, really getting a good accountant, right? Having good financials is key to getting approved. And I'll say, I know you mentioned, it's difficult, but I could tell you most people, when I tell them yes, they're celebrating. They're pretty much celebrating. So.
Thank you. No, and I agree. Thank you so much for sharing those. And, we are all here because amongst each other, the SBA, the SDO, the GNE, the MBDA, the Fed, there's a lot of help. But for a lot of this, it takes a relationship. We have to, you have to, it's a back and forth of these things. And again, thank you so much. And we do have like 2 minutes if anybody wants to ask anything.
First, thank you for the presentation. I have 2 questions.
Hit the button.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. I have 2 questions. First, short-term lending. So if you have receivables and you want to get a loan against receivables, I just wanted to ask, you said something about the cleanup period. If you could say a bit more about that, number 1. Number 2, can you say quickly, it's important if you want to grow with a lender, the relationship aspect of it. Like, how do you set yourself up for the long-term growth experience that you ultimately want to have?
Sure. Let me answer the first part. So in terms of short-term facilities, like a line of credit, right? So the reason why a bank will put a cleanup period, it's usually like a 30-day cleanup period. That proves that you're not continuously using that at some point in time in your cycle, your business cycle, over that year, that you've zeroed out that line. And so that's what that is for, is to really prove that you're using it for short term. Because if you need long term, then you should pretty much go back to the bank and say, I want to term this out. I can't pay it down. I'm growing too fast, right? I've gotten a whole bunch of different maybe contracts, right? And I'm growing even more, so maybe I need to term this out over a longer period of time, that I can't pay it down, over 30 days in 1 year. If you want to handle the second part.
Receivables. About receivables or about the long-term relationship?
Long-term.
Yeah.
Oh, so I could just
receivables,
talk in terms of receivables. So receivables, I mean, depending on the type of business it is, right? Most banks are going to lend you approximately 75% of all receivables under 90 days, that they have not been outstanding for more than 90 days. Beyond that, banks are going to discount those to say that, are they collectible? I know in the day and time that we live, right, there are all the folks that are just probably not paying you within that time. So you have to have that conversation. But most banks will do 75% of all receivables under 90 days. And the other thing that you can just be aware of, right? Let's say if you have concentration in your receivable base, you should be able to explain that, So let's say one receivable makes up 50% of all your receivables. Yeah. That's going to be discounted. So be prepared to explain why. Yeah. So hopefully that answers your question.
And from a little bit of a different perspective, we do the same thing. We lend up to 80% of receivables. But in terms of the concentration, we're okay with it as long as it's with a known entity. So like if it's with a corporation or if it's with a city, we're okay with having a concentration because we assume it's going to get paid because of the credit rating of the entity you're engaging with. And we call that a borrowing based line of credit. So that's a term you might hear. On the long-term relationship, this is so important. I talked a little bit before about knowing the purpose for your loan, but it's also important to establish a relationship with the lender before you really need the money. If you have a line of credit and it's been sitting idle for a while, you should probably draw down on it because your bank might close it out. You don't want that. Another thing, just from a CDFI perspective, we offer, and no commercial, but as an industry, we'll offer smaller loans to larger loans, and as CDFIs, what we often do is we'll start a borrower at a lower loan amount, like a $15,000 or $20,000 loan, and then over time graduate to a larger loan. So that's another way that you can establish the relationship with the lender.
Thank you. And we'll take one more, and then we'll go.
Brief question. So when you talk about SBA loans, I've been in business for a while, and I've gotten a few SBA loans, very small amount, $25,000, $20,000, paid them all off. During COVID or 2021, I ended up just presenting my paperwork to SBA, went straight to SBA, remember?
Mm-hmm.
And I got $500,000 in loans. The only difference, because my paperwork was intact, my credit wasn't great because it was credit card heavy, and I was able to explain that to them, but I pay all my bills on time. The only difference is they didn't see who I was. And so I thought I hated SBA, but it turns out that I dislike banks, that SBA, asked to facilitate the loans because they're looking at me, and I feel like they are, it's almost like saying no because they see who I am. And nothing else is relevant.
Right.
Can you please address that? And I know it's true because
Money
I've been
to
a
give
partner for
away
years.
Okay.
for
So-
COVID.
So, yeah, I mean, over the last several years, right, COVID, frankly, I ran the PPP program for the bank, so I don't know if that was it or if it was an idle loan that you received, but those loans were unsecured, unguaranteed at 1%, right? And if you used it correctly, you were completely forgiven, right? And maybe some of my colleagues at the Fed could probably talk about the impact of how that kind of masked a lot of problems over the last few years. So yes, in the last couple of years, right, there was money available to small businesses, through government programs, but traditional lending, yes, you have to prove debt service, you have to provide collateral, you have to do the financials, and it is, a tedious process, right? But as I said, understanding and being prepared, right, it can be done,
So-
frankly, I'll tell you that, M&T is the 7th largest SBA lender in the country. And so we do it on a daily basis. It is available. But I agree with you. In the last couple of years, there was a lot of money that was available through government programs.
Yeah, balance sheets certainly looked very different for a lot of people. But thank you so much. And we are now going to break to lunch. And Christina, where are we going? Thank you again.
We're going to go ahead and get started with the afternoon program. Just one more hour to hopefully give you guys some information. Okay? All right. It's okay, Lisa. I got you. All right. So we're going to do some conversations on M&A. We've got Harold Blackwell and Sion Cogdell that are going to give us what we need. You guys ready? All right. Thank you both.
Thank you so much, Christina, and thank you so much, everyone. Good afternoon. So this afternoon, Yeah, it's going between green and red. Good afternoon, everyone. So it's a pleasure and happy to be here and looking forward to this next conversation. We're going to have a fireside chat with Sion Cogdell, who is the chairman and CEO of Panther Group Holdings. Sion, it's a pleasure.
Good to be here, Harold. Thank you very much.
All right. So, Sion, we're just going to have a nice, relaxed conversation regarding mergers and acquisitions. So before diving into direct questions, from your perspective, where was the point where you realized that mergers and acquisitions would be what the chairman of Panther Group Holdings was going to be in your future, and also what precipitated you looking at your first acquisition?
Excuse me. First, when you said fireside chat, I thought we talked Celtics today. But for those Celtics fans who, yeah, tough loss, tough L. I'm a Knicks fan, so. But you know, organic growth versus inorganic growth, right? We were probably growing 3 to 5% per year, you know, standard. COVID hits, which is a entirely another story. But it's like, how do you get to a point where you're a major player? And based on our strategy, kind of what we wanted to do, it was inorganic growth. We were looking at mergers and acquisitions. So the Panther Group provides staffing, permanent temporary staffing and workforce solutions for organizations. We're throughout North America, Canada, United States, Mexico, some Latin America, Panama, Costa Rica, and Ecuador. And we're starting to roll into Europe now. You know, but how do you really capture the growth? How do you grow exponentially? And the decision was made that, one, technology is a big factor, right? Process improvement, technology, but also inorganic growth through acquisition.
Yeah, and so one of the things that I'm going to piggyback on with that point is just ask a few questions with respect to that. So when evaluating potential targets for a merger or acquisition, what are the key factors that business owners such as yourself should consider to ensure a strategic fit?
So a couple things there. One is, of course, the financial viability of the company. Mm-hmm. Although we've had a number of acquisitions. One acquisition was actually, they had losses for 3 previous years, right? So we dug into the financials, tried to figure out, you know, why that was happening, and it determined that we had a lot of synergies there, right? Ways to cut costs, and that business complemented ours, right? So we were able to turn that relatively quickly without a big cash flow investment right after acquisition, and we turned that. But we look at the financial viability of the company, and I say that to say don't say no because you see losses, right? Really dig in with due diligence into the numbers. Another thing that is critical, I feel, is the company's culture, the cultural fit. We had a negative experience where we created a joint venture to provide staffing services for multinational corporations. This is why we are in other countries. The projected spend was $1 billion. That's with a B. All we were looking at were the dollars, right? Looking at the dollars and cents. We could make this happen. We can make this work. Our cultures couldn't have been much more different. It did not work at all. We ended up dissolving the joint venture. Culture is absolutely critical. The synergies just have to be there. You know, what are the company's ethics, right? What do they believe in, right? I mean, do you have to work till 8 o'clock every night because your manager is, you know, looking over your shoulder, or is it more of a flexible work environment, right? Work friendly for the employee. Culture is absolutely critical. Then we look at the market position of the company. So we've had, you know, we'll do a what do you call it? Google stalking. You know, we look at your ratings on Google, right? Any pending lawsuits, past lawsuits. What were the reasons for those lawsuits, right? Was it reasons that were unethical, and does that resonate now, you know, down the line? which gets into, are we going to have a stock acquisition or an asset acquisition, right? And the number of factors sort of factor into that. I would say the biggest caveat, though, is really understanding the company's culture, and it has to align with yours.
So, to that point, then, how would someone try to mitigate those as being a potential detractor from a good deal, for example?
So so really, and I have to credit Peter with this, right? So that's Peter Hurst, President and CEO of the GNE. I'm just kidding, but we, you project revenue out, right? You project revenue, but you really can control costs, right? So I can pick your financial statements apart, or my team, right? Your balance sheet apart to really determine where we stand financially. So that is important, but again, it gets the culture.
Yeah, because once you make that commitment, then there's not much to do, and you can't walk that back at that point, especially if you're not going to be a cultural fit across the board, right? So, so, Sion, to that point, so you mentioned culture. You also walked back and said basically don't let losses be a deal breaker. But from your perspective, can you share a challenge or obstacles that you encountered yourself and during an M&A deal? And if you could just provide some insights with regard to the strategies that you and your team employed to overcome those challenges, which then led to a successful integration in an M&A deal.
Okay, so again, we've had a couple over the years. So two in mind. One is it's much easier to negotiate with senior leadership and the board that aren't founders and owners. There's an emotional attachment and connection with the sole proprietor from the perspective of acquiring. So you get questions like, I have seasoned staff members, you're like family, and I want you to keep them. With any merger or acquisition, you have redundancy, right? We don't need two HR managers. We don't need two controllers. We don't need, we may need additional staff to handle some of the volume, but there's some cuts that are gonna happen, right? So there's an emotional component to a founder who is still actively involved in the organization, which makes negotiation, difficult, right? You do want to empathize. First of all, if the culture aligns, right, you can feel for the person, right? It's more than just a business transaction, and I think that was the question with earlier on the panel, where you get to know the borrower, right? You really want to get to know. I want to get to know my counterpart, right? What do you think? How do you feel? How do you respond to certain situations? So that made it difficult, the emotional component. My wife always tells me I don't have an emotional bone in my body, so but I did work through that. I did. I say I'm an incurable romantic, but she argues with me. But that's a bit more difficult. Another challenge though is when you're dealing with boards or senior leadership that only look at metrics. They only look at numbers. They look at so if it's an EBITDA calculation, right? The earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, and they want to sell the company at a multiple of the EBITDA. But I'm like, that doesn't always work. So it's you have to go in with an open mind. You have to understand that one of my business mentors told me mergers and acquisitions die 3 or 4 deaths right before they come to fruition. You kind of have to hang in there. You got to be willing to some give and take. Understand what your deal breakers are going in, and really just working through that.
Yeah, that's actually great points, Sion. So since we're here at a Federal Reserve Bank, specifically in talking about funding and financing, when it comes to funding the acquisitions that you did, what was your approach when it came to pulling together the capital stack of those deals?
So a couple of different scenarios there too, and the Federal Reserve happens to be a client of ours. So with one acquisition, we were a little skeptical on the numbers. the powers that be on the other side made certain assurances. So we structured an earnout. Okay, if the numbers are what you say they are and the client base is what you say it is, then 2 or 3 years down the road, we should still be at this position, although our infrastructure should grow that number. And if you're as committed, so we'll give you a little bit down, but what are our guarantees and ride this out with us. So that was one scenario. Another scenario was a couple large institutional clients, and with the contracts, they had 4, 5, 6-year contracts, but all the contracts have 30-day out clauses, right? And one of the out clauses is if there's a material change in ownership, then you can pull the plug, right? So, okay, all right, what are our guarantees, right? We acquired this company, now all the clients are gone, right? So we have clawback provisions that we put into these contracts based on the projected revenue from other contracts. So it gets complicated. Attorneys are great. The MBDA is terrific in terms of providing advice on mergers and acquisitions. I would recommend speaking to them. So, but it varies. You have to be open-minded going into it. And there's a number of scenarios and vehicles. Fortunately for Panther, we've had the cash flow where we didn't have to seek outside funding for our acquisitions. So that's how we approach it.
And that's actually something I did want to stay on that same vein, Sion, is when you're talking about earnouts, for example, owners and founders. So the SBA, they usually have a requirement where basically, even if you want to keep on the owner or the founder to help with the transition, that it can be no more than, Nadine's not here, somewhere about like 6 months, roughly, give or take. Is that correct? Anybody in the audience? Well, either way. So with that said, is that a reasonable time frame to allow for a transition in terms of a smooth transition? Or is that kind of more of hurry up, get this done, and we're trying to reduce the risk related to providing you the capital to do this acquisition?
I think that's organization dependent, right? So again, if the target company, the culture's aligned, right? You sort of have to understand how they do things. And I'll give another example. We acquired back in 2018 a small boutique financial services company out in New York City, down on Wall Street. Did a lot of work with hedge funds and financial services, a lot of fintech type positions there. Difficult to.
Yeah. So in terms of making the transition from when you're making an acquisition and you have the requirement, what usually if you're getting SBA capital, they're saying you have to make the transition between 3 to 6 months of no longer being able to have the founder on board. Right. And so if doing that, there's obviously the challenges because is 3 to 6 months good enough or ensuring a quality transition basically between the founder, because you have to account for, introductions to clients, management of the clients, introductions to team, et cetera.
Yes.
So in terms of facilitating that smooth transition, did you, from Panther's perspective, have an issue with regard to making that type of smooth transition from the previous ownership to integration into Panther?
Right. So, okay, right. I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. So going back to the financial services firm, that actually, that was so niche that we needed the experience level of the ownership at the time. Mm-hmm. So we actually brought the gentleman in. He actually works for us now to sort of maintain the level of experience we need, because the learning curve there was pretty steep. So we kept him. Now we just acquired a firm in January where larger, again, multinational organization. The leadership there, though, we felt that we needed to change it pretty quickly. So because what we wanted to do was bring the Panther culture into this organization, right? The culture's aligned, but we still have a certain way that Panther operates and processes our processes, how our way of doing things, our corporate culture. So we had an SVP on the Panther side that we promoted to president of Enterforce, the acquired entity, to bring over the synergies. The key there was communication, right? So the target company staff are on edge, right? Am I keeping my job? What's happening here? So we had to very clearly communicate with them that the positions were safe, but that there would just be a leadership change, regular meetings. I mean, we did things like now we have, every 2 weeks, we have virtual happy hours, right? To really try to keep the cohesion together with the team. They're fully remote, post-COVID, they shut down. So they've been fully remote for 3 years. We do have office space there. We're trying to close out now. But, how do you keep your current culture, but really integrate into the new culture? A lot of communication, a lot of employee engagement. So in some instances, yes, we'll keep some of the leadership there. Definitely some of the middle managers that know the operation and the process and how it's working. And in other instances, we feel that culturally or based on our trajectory, our forecasting, we may have to make a change with leadership.
Fair enough. Well, so at this point in time, we'd like to be able to put it out to the audience and see if anyone has any questions or would like clarification about any specific points.
Can you guys hear me? Here we go. A couple of months ago, we heard about the whole Silicon Valley Bank. The Silicon Valley Bank situation. I'm pretty sure that the FDIC and the Fed were involved with this whole situation. And then a couple of weeks later, we hear about the bank being acquired by some other bank. Can you provide an opinion on what happened in that particular case?
Oh, with the banking failures?
Yeah, so with regard to that, banks usually have a different process because one of the first things out the gate when you're looking at banks in terms of assets and liabilities is that liabilities on the book for a bank are their assets as opposed to a general business operation. But for the conversation that we're having here, we really want to focus and be specific to addressing businesses, SMBs type businesses owned by MBEs.
So I think it's really important what you brought up about the culture issue. And I've been in organizations and seen this happen where culture was kind of a deal killer. I'm curious to know, have there been times either of you have witnessed where culture prevented a deal from happening, and to what level does the cultural conflict need to exist where a deal would be inadvisable for an M&A?
So we've had a number of two opportunities where we actually hadn't gotten that far. As we began to look at their processes, we determined that it's not quite the way we do things. So I guess, and my presumption then was the cultures are different, right? So we didn't dig in beyond that to specifically determine whether that was the case, but that was my feeling. And then we had another organization that just ethically were doing things that, there's a whole lot under the rug once you lifted the corner of it, right? It's like, wait a minute. And we just really didn't want to go down that path with them. So, I believe that's cultural as well. Yeah.
Hey, Harold. Thank you for the conversation. So businesses pursue M&A transactions for a list of reasons. You mentioned growth, and I'm wondering it sounds like you pursued a transaction more than once. And so I'm wondering if you could be helpful for us here, if you could talk about some of the reasons you pursued the transactions, and was it because sometimes people do it for technology capability, or the list goes on and on. I'm just wondering if you could share that with the group.
Absolutely. So really, it was the primary reason was to enter a certain market, right? So Panther Group, traditionally, we provide staffing, permanent temporary staffing, workforce solutions, meaning a direct relationship with a client that we provide staffing to. So we have a number of IT folks, again, here at the Federal Reserve. 80% of large corporations have MSPs, managed service programs, where an organization, an agency, will manage all of their hiring, all the contingent labor. So the organization that we acquired just this past January is a large MSP service provider, right? Under Armour is a client of ours now, Wisconsin Energy, a number of large multinational corporations. So with 80% of all Fortune 500 companies operating under the MSP model, we had to get into that space. And this is why we pursued that. So now the synergies there, though, are now the Panther Group can become a supplier at all these multinational corporations, but also Interforce can now sell into our existing clients that don't have MSPs, as well as now pursuing third-party MSPs. So that was really the thinking there.
So a question, Sion, for I think some of our MBEs are helpful. Some of the acquisitions, where did you find these opportunities? You go through an investment banker, broker, where does those, two questions, that's one question. The second being, most of your acquisitions sounds like they're all been the roll-ups into your current field. We have a couple MBEs looking to go vertical and get outside of their current. What would be your recommendation for them of what you've learned to go into a vertical market? For example, maybe you have a lot of staffing in facilities, so you want to buy a facilities management company. You know, what would you look for? So two questions there. Who did you go to and find these opportunities? And then the second being the vertical.
So we are very active with our industry and trade organizations. And we were actually at conferences, and we'd meet individuals, and we'd hear stories about companies that are cash flow a little rocky, or operations a little sketchy, and or an individual owner is looking to sunset, right? So a lot of it was just networking. Our biggest opportunity here was a networking event. The current, or my counterpart on the other side, was looking to sunset, and was approached by a supplier that I've worked with over a number of years that had a personal relationship with her, brought the opportunity to us, and we were able to fortunately close on it. Yeah. Now, in terms of vertical versus horizontal integration, we looked at that too. We get approached about real estate and warehousing, and one was importing dog biscuits from Brazil. All seriousness, right? And I mean, the guy's making a whole lot of money. So we definitely considered it. But I wanted to retain our focus, right? Really to maintain the focus. Like, I need to sunset, right? I'm getting old. We want to grow this out as much as we can, right? Create opportunities for individuals. And then, I could come up with a good exit strategy. And I'll see you all on the beach.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Two different guys sitting beside each other.
I'm sorry.
Anthony?
Yep.
Sure. So, quick question. When you're considering an M&A, have you developed a playbook or a decision tree or an algorithm for how to assess point-wise how to evaluate that M&A or whichever opportunity it is?
Yeah, we do have a formalized structure. Okay. So again, we dig into the financials. It's extensive due diligence. We do extensive searches for any legal matters, right? Closed, pending, try to forecast out that. We look at the marketing position of the company statistically, where do they sit within the industry that they're in. We do heavy due diligence on, again, I mean, what is it, the Google stalking. That's it. Thank you very much. We really do an extensive, because these ratings are important. And if you read the context of the rating, sure, I mean, we get pounded at Panther now, right? Onboarding was terrible, and and they did a terrible job. Well, it was a direct placement we had, and we weren't responsible for their onboarding, right? So you have to put it in context. But a lot of that commentary really gives you insight to what the company is doing and not doing. But yes, Anthony, it is a formalized plan that we walk through to make the determination of whether or not we want to proceed with the acquisition or not. But again, I cannot, and I know I've said this a lot of times, I cannot overemphasize how important culture is. I can't. That will be a make or break, regardless of the revenue stream. It's just certain things you just can't talk. Well, unless you're an unethical acquirer, right? But there's certain things you just have to be aware of when it comes to culture.
Thanks.
Yes.
Yes, I have a couple of questions. First question is, with that Wall Street firm that you acquired, you said it was small, but I'm curious, what was the dollar volume of assets it had under management? And the second question was, what type of regulatory issues you might have had to deal with with the SEC?
So this was, again, they're a staffing firm, so they had no assets under management, but their revenue base was about $14 million a year in gross revenue. No regulatory issues other than with certain positions, we have a secret security clearance with the Department of Defense, so we had to make sure all of our certifications were up to date with regard to that. But there were no regulatory hurdles or compliance issues that we had, again, because we're on the staffing firm side. We don't manage assets per se.
Well, Sion, this was a pleasure. Thank you so much. I had a great time having a conversation with you this afternoon, and I'm always looking forward to sniping some good ideas from a great mind such as yours. So thank you so much. It was a pleasure, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Harold and Sion. All right, Gary, you ready? Please welcome Gary Stifler and Judy Frode.
Oh, there we go. All right, Judy, we're the only thing between the traffic and everybody getting out of here. So, well, I have the pleasure today of bringing Judy Frode here with me today from Altura Capital. So the last perspective we wanted to give you is on private equity. So, with our MBEs, they got many different avenues and resources to go to for capital resources, right? We had the banks in here. We talked about acquisitions and how to pursue that. So now we want to talk about private equity in general and what to look for if you're a business that's looking for driving more capital, acquiring other businesses, et cetera. So, Judy, I guess with that, to start out, what is the strategy most PE firms take as far as how they look at their investments? What markets, what industries, et cetera? What is typically looked at from private equity perspective for investments?
So, can everyone hear me?
And you need a green button when you push
Now,
it.
can you hear me? Yeah. I usually never need a mic. So private equity, again, it depends on the size of the fund. We'll have a diverse portfolio of companies, assigned to any particular fund. So they'll look for companies where usually their leadership group, their partnership has industry expertise in. So, for example, the fund that I'm a managing partner of, we have 4 verticals where the partners and the founders, we have expertise in those industries. So we try and channel where we add value to companies that would align with us. And we kind of stay out of the businesses where we can't bring value or we really don't have any operational expertise to bring to bear. And in the private equity model, in a fund, let's say on average, if you have 10 to 14 investments in your fund, you want, you'd love all of them to be home runs, but statistically, you want the majority of them to be successful and profitable. Where if you look at a venture capital fund, they have lots of investments with the thesis that most won't make it, but you'll get one home run, and that'll cover the returns for the whole fund. So the further you go down kind of the capital structure continuum, you're looking for probably a higher success rate.
That's actually a pretty good example, I think, of that. So as a business owners out here, I know one question they had, I know I had it when I had my business. What kind of equity positions do most PE firms take? Because everybody hears different stories. They're coming in, they want 80%, or they want 50%. They want, what is kind of the criteria, and what is typical equity positions private equity firms look for?
So most private equity firms will want majority control. And so mathematically, that's, a smidge over 50%. And the reason behind that is they want to be able to influence and help influence the strategy of the firm to get to its next its next success hurdle. When you don't have majority control, you just don't have that influence, but you have a significant amount of capital tied up into that investment. So again, always a little dependent, where if you partner with another firm or another co-investor to make that acquisition, sometimes you can take a minority position and you'll get a board seat or a board observer seat. But I'm going to say, in general, most private equity firms will want majority. That doesn't mean 80% or 100%. It could be 51%.
So with that said, one of the fears that management teams have. So private equity comes in. How do they typically look at the management team structure? I think it's a little different than what we've talked about with the banks and some of the other areas, because private equity is looking at investment in the business. So
Right.
typically,
So I don't, I'm going to guess I'm a little older than a lot of this room, but I think the tragedy about kind of just the perception about private equity is you see one movie like Barbarians at the Gate and you're done. You're like, oh, that's not going to happen. And that's really not what private equity is. So private equity really wants to go in, really partner with the leadership team. And, the prior speaker on culture is incredibly important, because you're really going to be working side by side with this leadership team in this company for 4, 5, 6 years. So you have to have alignment on what you're trying to accomplish, what the goals and objectives are, a very clear strategy to get to that end. And again, with like I'm in lower middle growth, the objective is not to take any leadership positions. Our objective is to help drive value from the side and behind that team. So we don't go in and we put ourselves in the CEO role or controller role or CFO role, anything like that. We want to support the management team that's in place. Unless they are looking to transition or it's a generational shift or something like that. But more than likely, we want to support the team that's currently gotten the success to where they are today.
so you touched on something. You're playing a small middle market range. So to help everybody, what does that mean? So what's the typical deal sizes that not only your firm, but other firms in the small middle market would look at?
So it varies. So for my firm, the floor is $2 million in EBITDA. So we, preferably audited financials, a pattern of growth, kind of a history of growth, with a kind of an objective of where to get to the next level. Again, we're further down the continuum. We're venture. So venture, it's friends and family supported. It's angel investors. So we're probably, 2 steps down the continuum. So the company has to have a little bit of, kind of a solid footing to them.
And we'll touch on, I think, a little bit later here why that's important from an exit standpoint. So from a private, you mentioned, obviously the managing partners like yourself and others it's how the verticals you look at in making investments. But where would you go to find those investments? Who do you typically work with to find, what businesses are out there for sale and that type of area?
So many different avenues. So there's the traditional investment banking avenue. There's the network of private equity. So private equity is like a recipe. You need lawyers, you need good companies, you need accountants, and you have to have a good, solid managing partner group to make that investment. So within all of those networks, we'll get referrals from any one of them. We'll get a referral from our lawyers to say, hey, there's this company that's looking for capital. We think you'd be a great cultural fit together, and that's a source. We look at investment bankers, that bring deals to bear. But we also have an incredible network. So collectively, the 4 partners of Altura, we have over 120 years of experience. So with that, We have vast proprietary networks where we can work with somebody in a supply chain of another company that says, hey, I know somebody else who worked with you. Can we have a conversation? I'm looking for capital solution, whether it's debt or equity. So they kind of come in, different lanes.
Different levels.
Yeah.
So with that, a lot of, I think also business owners talk about with private equity, again, you mentioned the criteria in which what you look at for small middle market. It does prevent an opportunity for, I think, business owners to maximize the value of their business that way also. But I think the other concern is, especially coming in and the management team still there, what is the typical exit strategy that private equity firms work with now? Again, I know that can vary, but the typical, what is the run rate that typically private equity looks at?
So again, it would be company dependent on what the strategy and what industry lane they're in. But the main three, when you start planning for an exit, you're looking for either a strategic buyer, somebody else to come in and take it and grow it to to that next level, perhaps. People can IPO the company, or another financial sponsor can come in and purchase it. So those are the three main lanes of exiting.
And how long typically you're holding your investments, though? I mean, the old school used to be 5 years. It was the run rate.
Still
But
old
it
school.
depends. Okay.
Yeah. It's usually 4 to 5 years.
Okay.
3, 4, 5, 6 years, someplace in that. It's really when, and it varies. It's how quickly you achieve whatever objective that you've originally laid out. But usually you want to be able to take enough time to make the operational changes, the financial changes, grow and develop your own supply chain, your own team, hiring. Maybe there's a list of add-on acquisitions. So you want to make sure you give yourself enough time to have all those things take place, and you have a proof of concept that it's all working. And that just takes time.
Yeah, I think what I've seen is that it depends the market you're in, as you mentioned, right? Because some of the other markets, there's more roll-up potential, so they hold on the investment longer.
Right.
Because you're rolling up other markets similar to that, or the businesses similar to that. So we're going to pause here for a second, because I'll make sure room for questions before everybody wants to exit. But do we have some questions out there for Judy?
We can talk about the Celtics too, if you like. I have an opinion on that.
So Judy, just like lenders, when you invest, you really expect it to work. Like when lenders make a loan, they expect to get paid back. But I'm sure you've had misses. When you've had misses, could you summarize what the cause has been?
So, it really comes down to, especially in this size of the market, you're really taking over someone's, it's like taking over their child. They have this business. It could be first, second, third generation, or it could be they're the entrepreneur that started it. And there's just such a high emotional attachment to that. So when we partner and eventually get involved with the company, we really want to make sure that we're aligned culturally, philosophically. We have the same objectives. We can work well together. And invariably, we always tell everybody, there are going to be some significant hurdles in front of us. We're going to have some disagreements. So let's talk about how do we resolve those. So you really want to make sure that you can sit side by side and go through those battles together. And, every now and then you're going to get to a point where that breaks apart. And someone will say, well, I've been doing this for 15 years and then fill in the blank. But what you really want to figure out is we're trying to figure out how to work together and make this successful, but occasionally it will go off track. There's also you hope that it's rare because you do an incredible amount of diligence up front before you ever go through the acquisition process, is a market falls apart. If all you have to do is kind of look at COVID, you have really thriving companies and a completely unpredictable event happened that decimated companies when they had strong balance sheets, strong leadership, and you just have something that's a fluke that you really can't diligence. Mm-hmm.
Judy, so one of the things you mentioned earlier was $2 million in EBITDA. That's kind of the base.
Our fund's floor.
And it's typically, a lot of times, sometimes even north of that for a lot of. It is shocking to me sometimes the amount of business owners and entrepreneurs and founders that I speak to that have no idea what that is. And they're like, well, we revenue 37 million, but their EBITDA isn't at all very attractive. So can you just briefly tell us what that is?
So, Gary and I spoke at lunch a little bit about if you're going down this path and you're interested in getting, sourcing outside capital, and it can be from private equity, it could be local lenders, your bank, your community bank, you have to be prepared financially. And that doesn't mean, and sometimes the skill set to be a strong CEO where you're leading your business, you may not be the strong financial person, but you have to understand where your strengths and weaknesses are and how you complement with other resources. So I always tell people, you can outsource that, right? You can pay to have it outsourced. You can bring in someone to get your financials in order, to give you make sure that you're clear on what your run rate is for revenue, where your margins are, what's pending, what your invoice rate, like what your hold period is. So there's a whole series of metrics that have to be in place. And if you don't have that, and like I always tell people, I know you have a day job, you're running a company, but at some point you either have to pause and make sure that you're pulling alongside your financials and you have some resource to do it, whether it's internal or you can, bring somebody in to go through all that. Yes.
Any other question? Oh, yes.
Hi, I'm Ivy Lawson. So my question is, I've been getting a lot of correspondence, emails from investment companies and asking me if I'm looking for investors. And the answer to that question is yes, I think I'm ready to go that route. However, I had a meeting with one investment firm out of New York, and they asked me what my exit strategy was. And when I said, well, it's a Black-owned business, I would like to keep it Black-owned and consider profit sharing for my employees, because I feel like Black-owned businesses, exit strategy to sell to another big conglomerate and then your products go nowhere. And I think that kind of threw them for a loop. So if I want to keep my business within my culture for my kids and, my family, and just to, build, that type of wealth within our culture, how do I navigate that? How do I know who to talk to, who that's not going to turn off, when we go into investment?
That's a great question. And I think if you don't have to look too far back in this business where that'd be hard to answer. That'd be hard to figure out. But the reality is there's a lot of firms that just specialize in that. And I don't want to make this sound like this is an infomercial, but my firm, we're an ESG firm and we're an impact firm. So that's one of our objectives, is that we have a mandate for where 51% of our capital will be invested back into women and minority-owned businesses. So before whoever it is you're talking to, or whether it's a banker, is you have to be aligned on that. And that's one of the things to say, look, I'm going to get involved in someone that's going to help me achieve my goal. Or if you want to pass it down generationally, you have to make sure that generation is ready to take it. So how much time is that? If the child, if someone's 14, that's a long time. If they're in their 20s and they have, some good experience or education and they know the business, then you put a strategy in place for what that hopefully very smooth transition will be. But you really have to align with someone that understands what you want to accomplish. It's definitely your business, and that's your say in that.
And I think that's an important point, especially for family members, because I don't know how many business owners we talked to that thought they had a family member was going to go that route and found out differently and kind of late in the game. So now they're an owner that has, really no exit strategy per se for himself or herself. So that actually leads me to, I guess, our last question, and we'll handle other questions here. But Judy, in the past, and I can personally talk about this, the valuations of MBE firms were always reduced. They always talked about it was one multiple less, right? So again, when we talk about multiples, you're selling a business. If it's a $2 million business and you're in an industry, you think you can get a 6 or 7 multiple, it's $14 million you're talking about, right? But if you were an MBE, that's only 5 or that's only 6. Can you touch on that at all? If any of that's changed now, or you see that changing, or why, and I know the reasons they say why, but maybe you can touch on why that in an industry has spoken that way.
Well, I definitely see that's changed. I mean, we haven't encountered that. So we hope that's more the norm and not the exception. But if anything, you have either larger corporations or larger organizations that have a commitment to whether it's a diverse supply chain or minority-owned supply chain, or X amount of their business has to be, you have to demonstrate that you have partnerships there. So from my perspective, I think it's actually tipped the other way, where it's an advantage. And I think that you can look through the market, or you can get referrals on which private equity firms or which accountants or whatever your outside professional services needs are, where they partner with firms, because people definitely have mandates, and people should take advantage of that. So hopefully that's a sign of the past, but I think the valuation is the valuation, regardless of, we want strong, capable leadership. Whatever shape, size that looks like, that's really the secret sauce to having a successful investment.
I asked that question when I sold my business in 21. That wasn't the case. I mean,
Right.
when I said that wasn't the case, I got full multiple for that as if it's any business it was.
Right.
And so I think the tide has turned too, but I know past years that had always been a sticking point.
And it's not perfect, right?
No.
It's not perfect out there, but I think we're all headed in the right direction.
Any other questions here as we wrap up? And get everybody an extra 5 minutes to get in their car. Any other questions? Well, Judy, thank you for today.
Thank
And-
you.
And
Thank you, everyone.
thank everybody here virtually and on site. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for attending today in person and also virtually. Thank you, Greater New England, for partnering with us. Our corporate communications team, catering, IT, AV, everybody. We're hoping to host more events like this. So when you get your feedback survey, please be honest. Let us know how the event went and what you guys are looking for in the future. We want to be able to help you build that capacity and give you the information that you guys need to be successful. Thank you.